If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
People who are fairly certain they've seen a humanoid creature, dark entity, or unknown being, share your most terrifying encounters.
Has anyone heard of a cat-like creature with a human face? So, this is a story my mother has told me. These sightings came from Michigan, northwest of Flint, and south of Saginaw. According to the story, my parents were driving at night on All Hallows Eve between 1976 and 1979. Suddenly, a large, slender/lanky feline animal crossed the street, causing them to slam on the brakes. When the animal turned its head to look at them, they were horrified to see that it had a human face. This happened the following year, on the same road and on the same day, All Hallows Eve. My mother was raised in a northern Michigan family where strange forest events were kept quiet. It was believed that ignoring the creature prevented it from gaining power. So anytime she started to bring this up, my father or another family member would shut her down. I am the curious type. I like to have facts and knowledge. So if anyone has heard of anything like this before, either in Native American mythology or knows of things happening in that area, please let me know. The only thing I have found in my own research is a skinwalker. Boyfriend encountering humanoid shapes with my voice. My boyfriend drives a truck on the third shift and makes several deliveries each night. Some stores he delivers to are right next to the forest. Lately he's started to get weird feelings he's being watched. Then he'll see a humanoid shape that is sometimes more solid and sometimes like mist. A few times it has talked to him in my voice. At one point, it even attempted to lure him into the woods while calling out for help. Thankfully, he realized it couldn't be me, as he had just spoken to me, and I was 3 hours away at home. We've on and off had weird paranormal experiences at home lately, but a being using my voice when he's alone at night really has me freaked out. Has anyone experienced anything like this or had any knowledge that could help us? Humanoid creature. I want to share an experience I had when I was 5 years old that still haunts me. One night, around 9 p.m., I was playing outside in the backyard of my house. My mom asked me to come inside, telling me she would turn off the lights and close the door as a joke to make me listen. I was scared of being alone in the dark but stayed outside. After a while, my mom turned off the lights and closed the door. That's when I heard a strange noise, a soft PSSS, coming from the darkness near the gate. I turned around and saw something that froze my blood, a humanoid creature with completely white eyes, a smile showing sharp, shining teeth, and enormous claws. The worst part was that the creature began climbing the gate like it was nothing. I was paralyzed with fear and ran to the door, banging on it desperately. My mom opened the door quickly, but she couldn't understand what was happening. She closed the door behind me, trying to calm me down. I told her what I had seen, but she didn't believe me. She thought it was just a nightmare or something I imagined. I tried explaining that the creature had climbed the gate, but no one believed me. Even though I was growing older, the memory of that night has stayed vivid in my mind, and I still wonder what it really was. To this day, I can't help but wonder if that creature will ever come back. The fear from that night still lingers in my mind. Encounter with a weird humanoid figure. Anyone know what this could be? A few years ago, I saw something weird in Georgia near Cumming, in someone's backyard by a small creek. It was around 4 to 5 p.m. during the fall, and everything was calm and quiet, with some birds in the background. I was with a few friends and my brother at the time. We noticed this figure, and it stood out because of how strange it looked. It was cream-colored or off-white and didn't have any facial features at all. The head looked football-shaped, not exactly a football, more like an elongated oval, and the rest of the figure seemed pretty human-like in shape mixed with alien. It was around the same height or maybe a little taller than a normal person, and it had a slim build, not fat, but not muscular either. At first, it was just standing there, staring at some sticks it had in its hand. After a while, it looked up and stared at us. It didn't move or make any sound, just stood there watching us. We ended up running away after that. I wasn't really scared at the time because I was like 7 or 8. The area around us was completely still, with no breeze or movement in the trees. It felt too quiet. The stillness added to the weirdness of the whole experience. About a year or two later, I went back to that area with just a friend and my brother, and I saw it again, only this time it was closer, maybe about 150 feet away. It was still staring at us, just standing there and not doing anything else. It didn't approach us fast, but it slowly hovered towards us. I definitely knew it was aware of us. After that, I never saw it again. I was wondering if anyone has seen anything like this before or if you might know what it could be. An off-white or cream-colored humanoid with a football-shaped head and no facial features, around average height, maybe a bit taller. I need an explanation of what I saw. So, this happened about a year or two ago. My boyfriend, now husband, and I were driving along my old middle school bus route at about 9 or 10 at night. At the very end of the route, there's a small cul-de-sac with a red gate that leads to a local nature preserve. As we rounded the cul-de-sac and our headlights glazed over the gate, I saw an all-white figure, maybe an alabaster color. The figure's skin appeared too pale to be human. The figure was tall and very skinny, with no clothes. It ran so fast past the gate, in the opposite direction of the headlights, I thought it was just a figment of my imagination. You know, like when you think you see a figure out of the corner of your eye and then you look back and it's gone? So I didn't say anything about it. Then, my husband asked, "Did you see that?" And I said, "You saw that?" And ever since, we haven't been able to figure out or understand what we saw. It was not the reflection of the headlights, it was a humanoid figure but really tall, really skinny, really white, and completely naked. Lanky humanoid on all fours with a glowing face. Over the past few months, I've been haunted by dreams of a lanky humanoid creature squatting on all fours, its legs so long and lanky that when it's on all fours, its hips surpass its shoulders. I would estimate this creature to be at least 10 feet tall when it is not squatting, and its face resembles a neon outlined mask. Yet it seemed to be the creature's real face. Any time I have seen it, the creature has only sat in one spot and tilted its head by no more than 90 degrees to the left. Here recently, within the last week, I have spotted this creature not in my dreams but on the side of the road in Oklahoma. Everyone I have told previously has told me that I'm having some sort of psychotic breakdown, but I know what I saw, I just can't find anything about it anywhere I have looked. So I have decided to share it here for the first time, just hoping that I am not the only one who has seen it. Strange encounter. Hey everyone. I'm a long-time lurker on here, and I'm a personal believer in Bigfoot and other supernatural things, but I've never shared anything about it anywhere. Until now, of course, Lamau, but to be honest, I don't really think it was a Bigfoot that I witnessed in the story I'm about to tell. More so, I'm just looking for answers as to what I saw. Here is my encounter with something I cannot explain. This happened about 4 years ago in the small town of Chewelah, Washington. At the time, my girlfriend, now my ex, not that it really matters for the story, and I decided to plan a getaway trip for a long weekend in a yurt. We both loved nature, and going to a place far from the city in the middle of nowhere seemed like a good time. And it truly was a great time. The thing that struck me most about staying in that yurt was just how dark and quiet it was at nighttime in the middle of the night. When you're not used to the wilderness, it's quite striking how silent things can be and how dark the outside is when there's no light pollution involved. The outhouse where we had to go to the bathroom was about 75 yards away from the yurt, and you had to take a flashlight with you to navigate the darkness. The first night we were there, nature called, and I went outside to find the bathroom. I shined the flashlight that cut through the darkness like a lightsaber around and spotted I shine. It was nothing more than a good-sized female deer, but I would have had no idea she was there if I hadn't seen her eyes via the flashlight. The actual encounter occurred on our last night there, between 11 p.m. and midnight. We were playing cards inside the yurt by the fire when, out of nowhere, we heard this huge crash/bang on the side of the yurt. Almost as if something threw itself into the side of it or was running and didn't see it there until it was too late, kind of thing. Obviously startled, we wanted to see what made such a sound. As we were in the middle of nowhere, but we were still on a property and not very deep in the woods for it to have been a bear or mountain lion, at least I thought so. What happens next is hard to explain. I threw the door open and shined my flashlight like I did the night prior when I saw the deer, and I saw something in the same spot, but it was different. It had no eye shine. And I only saw it for a moment. But it looked like it was white, or gray, and it had a slender build to it. What creeped me out was the way it moved. It seemed to crouch down while looking in my direction, slinking away out of the frame like a big cat or a monkey might move out of the way. After that, I never saw anything again. I didn't want to investigate because, shit, I was scared it might have been a cougar or something, and I'm not trying to die in front of my girlfriend, even if she left me not long after this. That aside, whatever I saw was unlike anything I've seen before. I didn't make out a face. I heard a witness's account earlier today that someone had a Bigfoot encounter with it crawling across the ground. And for whatever reason, it made me remember this encounter, and it sent shivers down my spine. I'm not saying it was a Bigfoot. Hell, it could have been something normal, I guess. I did only see it for maybe a few seconds at most. But I have never seen anything move like that in real life or even in a movie or TV show. It was strange, and I'm sorry if I'm rambling, but I guess I'm wondering if anyone has had a similar encounter or an explanation for what I could see. Conroe, Texas. Flying humanoid. It was July of 2021 when we were taking our umpteenth girls' trip to Galveston. 2 up front and 2 in the back seats of a Hummer. We're talking and listening to music when I noticed something flying toward us alongside Highway 45, far in the distance. As we traveled, we were all trying to determine exactly what it was we were seeing. It was draped in black and literally seemed to be a faceless, upright human, flying in a straight line, yet without arms or any sort of propulsion. We estimated we were able to watch it for about 2 miles as the gap closed between us. It was fairly high, but we all saw that it appeared to be wearing a flowing type of fabric. This thing was the subject of discussion for days afterward. To this day, we still wonder what we saw and agree there was no way it behaved like a kite or a jet pack. Plus, the area is mostly ranch lands. Has anyone else seen something like this? I have had an encounter with a demonic entity. I'm religious, and in my faith, we believe in jins, satanic entities that can possess or torment you. My family and I went to stay at my aunt's house one night, but from the moment we stepped in, something felt off. No one spoke about it, but we all felt it. After dinner, my stomach turned with intense pain, though we joked it was just my aunt's cooking. Later, we all went to bed in one room. It was supposed to be a normal night. But I woke up drenched in sweat, stomach aching horribly. I couldn't focus my eyes, but then I saw it, something moving in the dark. At first, it looked like a pile of clothes, but as my vision cleared, I realized it wasn't clothes at all. There was a figure. The figure was a small, humanoid shape, clad in a black dress, with skin so pale that it appeared almost translucent. Its face, if you could even call it that, was unnaturally long and featureless, like a blank canvas. Long black hair hung to its knees, and 2 strands of hair floated in the air like they were alive. I froze. My body wouldn't move. I tried to scream, "Mom!" But my voice was weak, strained. I shouted again, "Mom!" Finally, she woke up, and I pointed at the figure, but nothing happened. There was no creature in sight, nor a pile of clothes. There was only a jacket dangling from the closet door. Everyone told me it was just my imagination. But the next morning, my sister told me she had seen a dark figure pacing around the room while we slept. She could move, though, and swore our mom had whispered for her to stay still. My mom later confessed she had dreamt of drowning but never sinking. She woke up soaked in cold water. That night, we all had our own terrifying experience. But when morning came, it was like it had never happened. Or had it? My brother saw something. My brother went out to get pizza, and he came back very, very scared. We thought he had a headache. He was clutching his head with his hands. He said he didn't. The way he was acting, we thought he may have seen someone get hurt or something and that he was in shock. This is all very unusual behavior for him. He says that while he was making his way past the church, he saw a humanoid figure with red eye shine following him. It was watching him from behind the trees, and it would sort of teleport from one tree to another. He didn't say much else about it. We've been trying to debunk it, but nothing we give as a possible explanation. Dog, black bear. The first thought my sister and I had was that he was startled and his brain did some fun shit with something normal, fits. He's mentally well, so we're pretty sure he's not psychotic and hallucinating. Does anyone know what this sounds like? If anything? From a paranormal view, I think it could have been something feeding off of his fear because, as far as I can tell, it followed him no further than the church. I'm thinking about giving him some of my salt. I practice magic, so I have a whole reserve of the stuff all to myself, to sprinkle around his windows just in case. My encounter at night in the remote Finnish countryside. This happened 3 years ago. It was December 26th, and I and my sister had just visited our grandparents, who live on a farm in the remote Finnish countryside. It was not particularly late, perhaps around 7 in the evening, but this being the north, the road was pitch black, and there were no streetlights. My sister was driving carefully because you never knew when a deer would jump out, but I was looking around at the roadside, which was only lit by the car's headlights. Suddenly, I saw the shape of a slightly unnaturally tall man standing perfectly still at the side of the road, simply staring blankly ahead while remaining still. The humanoid figure seemed to pay no attention to us or the car. The very moment I saw the humanoid figure, my lizard brain sensed danger. I almost jumped on my seat, and my heart started beating extremely rapidly. I had never experienced that sort of sudden visceral fear before, and my sudden reaction freaked out my sister, who was driving. I quickly looked back, and the figure was still there, but very swiftly it became too dark to see. This was a very remote road with multiple kilometers to the nearest farms, and there were no street lights. In theory, it's not impossible for a tall person to have been walking in the area and stopping to allow a car to pass. However, This was not the case, as there were no houses nearby, the road was completely dark, and the temperatures were freezing. The way the humanoid was just blankly staring ahead was also very unnatural. I don't know what I saw, but it reminded me of Finnish and Scandinavian folklore and a creature called Nutipukki or Kekrapukki, which resembles a northern Scandinavian version of Krampus. The season would match. However, while I didn't see the humanoid for very long, it did not seem very goat-like, although it did seem to be around 2 meters tall. I haven't heard of stories about skinwalkers in this part of the world, but I can't rule that out either. Encounter with a tall, thin humanoid in Denver. My dad was gone for the weekend, and I had a couple of friends over, and as we were hanging out, we kept hearing noises that sounded like they were coming from my roof or upstairs. We checked the house and found nothing. Eventually, one of my friends left, but the other stayed for a final smoke. As we were on my back porch, I was on the phone with my dad explaining the strange things that happened as I was going to be alone that night. My friend began moaning in what I can only describe as pure primal fear, so I began asking him what, and suddenly my dog started barking. I looked to the right off the small porch and saw a tall, extremely thin, ghostly pale creature. It was a horrid humanoid figure. I only saw it for a moment before I heard the rocks under it scatter, moving like someone was moving inhumanly fast over them. It was gone over the fence into the green belt behind my house in a split second. I'd say it resembles the rake but is much taller, perhaps 7 feet tall, and is a little more humanoid in how it looks. I theorized that the creature was on top of my roof before, as there's no other way to describe the sounds we heard or how the creature appeared so suddenly and silently. There was another experience a close friend of mine had in the direct vicinity, close to the exact same area that mine was. My house is backed up by a large open space that is within a 1 to 2 minute walk of a decrepit tunnel that's accessible by a rusted metal gate. It was often a frequented spot of ours in the past until strange occurrences started happening. Eventually a couple of my friends decided to investigate further into the tunnel out of curiosity. You must also take note that they claim this happened a while before my initial experience occurred. They walked deep into the tunnel for probably 10 to 15 minutes. At a certain point later in the tunnel, once flashlights are completely necessary, it stoops down. They said there were noticeable amounts of feces that had questionable explanations as to how they got there. With signs that the tunnel could be inhabited, but by something that couldn't simply be an animal. This is also in a suburban area where homeless people or addicts are extremely uncommon. This tunnel in particular I know for a fact no man would want to take up residence, especially with the small amount of water running through it. They reached a part in the tunnel where it got even lower, and above where it drops down is painted "Welcome to Hell" coincidentally. There they say they saw a tall, pale figure hunched in a way so that it took up most of the height of the tunnel but was noticeably gaunt and thin. And at that point they claimed to have seen it move, and they turned tail and frantically sprinted down the tunnel with no regard for the water or darkness. Given the description of what was witnessed, I would say that these two incidents are likely connected, and the creature in question is likely to be the same one in each story, especially given the vicinity in which they occurred. We now theorize that the creature witnessed at my house dwells in the tunnel during the day and prowls at night. We don't go near the tunnel anymore. I don't think there's a way this could be a coincidence. Has anyone experienced anything similar? What are your thoughts? Vermont humanoid. Okay, so I'll try to make this relatively short. So I'm not one for believing too much of cryptid lore. I never had an encounter before or anything like that, but my partner and I live on the border of upstate New York, not far from the Whitehall Bigfoot area. One night, my partner was taking out the garbage and came back inside startled. The situation left me feeling extremely shaken. They said they had seen a creature that looked like maybe a fox or coyote, but then it stood up on its hind legs, and so they booked it back inside. About a month later, I'm sitting on my porch, smoking a cigarette and taking in the stars under a clear sky. We have a small plot next to our house that has a tow-behind landscaping trailer permanently parked on it about 20-ish feet away from the house. After a while of standing outside, I get the sudden and intense feeling like something is watching me, just that primal feeling of danger. It should be noted that, like most people up here, I'm usually carrying a gun on me. Coyotes and bears are fairly common up here, so I kind of do a four-corner check of my surroundings. When I looked over at that trailer, I saw there was something the size of a large dog lying in the grass. Mind you, it's a clear night with a not quite full moon, and the grass was uncut long but not like a meadow. If I had to estimate, I'd say 7 to 9 inches high, so I had a really good view of this thing. Now I know never to approach a random animal bedded down at night, so I just kind of watch it for a second. Even in the light of the moon, its outline and coat were pitch black, blacker than anything I've seen before, unnaturally contrasting against the ground it lay on. Then it looks up, it has piercing red eyes. I'm thinking, "Aw, what the duck?" I put my hand on my revolver and said, "I'm not about to become coyote food." And then, it stood up. It stood up on its hind legs. The only way I can describe the legs of it is like that goat/human hybrid from the Narnia movie, but with the torso like a hybrid of man and canine. It was taller than me, and I'm 6 feet 1 inch. It didn't even need to take a step. I flicked whatever was left of my cigarette and backed away to the door, locked and bolted it, and spent the rest of the night wondering what I just saw. We've installed security cameras since, but now the lot is under construction, and we haven't seen it since. I don't know what I saw that night, truly, but I intend to find out one way or another. The figure. I'm looking for some clarity and comfort from this. In 2021, I and my close family had decided to take a road trip to North Carolina to pay my grandmother a visit for her birthday. We live in the Midwest, so it was quite a trip. Since my grandmother lives in a smaller cabin with 1 bedroom, we obviously couldn't sleep there, so we rented a larger cabin a town over. After we had spent the day having a good time and celebrating her birthday, the sky started darkening, so we decided to head out in order to make it to our cabin before it began to be too dark. This cabin we were staying in was high up in a mountain, which had been extremely hard to drive up to, as it was not only steep but also muddy. We finally made it to the cabin, but not before it had turned dark out and slightly rained on and off. The moment I had stepped inside, I felt a gross and off-putting feeling, but I had just blamed that on the dark atmosphere in the mountains. The clock was ticking, and everyone had been getting ready to sleep. I was stuck with having to sleep on the floor whilst the rest slept in beds. I could hardly attempt to even sleep due to the inability to be comfortable. I decided to try and use the restroom and wash my face in hopes that when I get back, I could finally sleep. The bathroom had been just across from where our room had been in the hallway of the cabin. The cabin was dark and silent. I had snuck into the bathroom, and on my way back to the room, once I stepped in, I turned around to shut the door behind me. Something stopped me. I stood there, hands still on the doorknob and eyes gazing up. What stood in the doorway was a large and thin being with an abnormally large head. This figure was not human whatsoever. The proportions were deathly and off, the waist was too skinny, and the ribs were too wide. The fingers lay just below the knees, it seemed, yet I didn't recognize any facial features whatsoever. When I noticed this figure and felt my blood run cold, I finished shutting the door in a rush whilst shaking. The moment the door clicked into place and finally shut, my brother woke up screaming in agony. Some background history: my brother was 20 at the time, and when he was younger, he suffered from sleep paralysis and night terrors, but he hadn't experienced something like that in 7 years. This utterly freaked me out, and I was unable to fall asleep at all that night. Is this just all coincidental, or is it truly something more and on the paranormal side? I had to receive therapy after this event, and I was unable to sleep on my own for a while due to this as well. Although this may seem a bit dramatic of me, I have an OCD diagnosis, and I quite frequently picture that figure and remember the gut-wrenching feeling of this situation and the fear of it coming back. 8 feet humanoid. I was driving through northwestern Connecticut at around 12:15 this morning when I saw a humanoid figure around 8 feet tall in the distance walking on the road. When I turned on the high beams, I could see the figure was black and had a pretty large build to it. When it noticed my high beams on, it picked up its walking pace to almost a speed walk and disappeared into the woods. Any ideas about what I saw? My dad saw a humanoid. When I was 8 to 9 years old, my dad and I visited Crater Lake and stayed at a nearby campground. We each had our own tent. Our tent was near a small river, and across it was the line of trees opening up to the forest. Around 4:30 in the morning, my dad woke up to the sound of rocks hitting our tent. There was a full moon, so my dad could see partially out of the tent. He says he saw a tall humanoid figure standing on the other side of the river. He watched it for a few seconds while it threw small rocks at our tent. It then walked back into the woods. I was asleep the whole time because my dad didn't want to wake me up since nothing really happened. It was just curious, I guess. We think it might have been Bigfoot, but who knows? 16 years later, I still can't explain the pale creature crawling on my parents' bedroom floor. I have only told a handful of people about this encounter, although it occurred about 16 years ago. Up until 5 years ago, I kept quiet about it because I was truly in denial about what I saw, and I was terrified that if I admitted that what I saw was real, I would one day see it again. Background: this happened sometime in 2008, which made me 7 years old. My parents bought this farmhouse with a lot of acreage. On the property there was a barn, a forested area, and a pond. The reason why my parents decided to buy that house was because my dad was someone who loved working on projects and taking care of the property, and he eventually wanted farm animals. At the same time, My parents were wanting a lot of land to eventually build a new family home for me and my brother to grow up in, even though there was already a house, which is the one we lived in, there. The house we lived in was a 2-bedroom, 1-story home. I would say it was less than 1,000 square feet in total. Before my experience in that house, I had no memory of any paranormal activity occurring there. Experience: I was brushing my teeth at the sink with my dad, who was in the bathroom. Still brushing my teeth, I turn around to face the bedroom, which was visible from the sink I was standing at. At that moment I turn around and see this pale, white humanoid creature on all fours across from the area around the fireplace and disappear behind the end of the bed. When it crossed, it didn't move slow, it went pretty quick. At the same time, when it moved, it never looked at me, so I wasn't able to see its face. Me being a kid, I honestly thought it was my brother at first, who is 4 years old at this time, and he was just being funny. So I am laughing as I walk out of the bathroom and go over to the end of the bed and say my brother's name, expecting to find him there as I turn the corner. I was shocked, as there was nothing at all. I even remember the feeling of my smile dropping, fully expecting to see my brother but being greeted by nothing. I then looked underneath the bed, and there was nothing there at all. I didn't mention seeing anything to my dad or mom, but I confirmed that my brother was sleeping in the other bedroom. Ever since that's happened, I have never seen that thing again. I still don't know what I saw, but it still continues to freak me out just thinking about it. Please let me know your thoughts on this story, and if you have any questions, I am open to answering them. I really appreciate you all listening to this. If someone has more information, please let me know. I know that this is most likely going to sound made up, and that's why I haven't shared about it yet, but I can't seem to get it off of my mind, and I'm wondering if anybody has any information or similar experiences. I was out in Long Island, New York, around the beginning of the new year, 2022, when I went out for a late-night drive with 2 friends of mine. We were about 40 minutes away from my house when we started feeling a really heavy presence surrounding us as we went down a specific road. My friend asked if we could turn around and go down the other turn instead, but doing that led us to a dead end, so we had to go back. As we drove down the road that felt menacing, we passed a cemetery that had 2 beings that appeared to be humans standing in robes facing a statue of the Blessed Mother and waving a wand towards it. As we drove by, we noticed that it seemed odd, so we drove in through the gate and parked a few feet away from them, to which they appeared to be statues at first, but then without even moving, they had started facing us and waving the wand over us. Their faces looked largely expressionless but also had features that I can only describe as a mix between a witch and a pig. My friend, who was driving, took off, and we started to head home, all feeling like something malicious was there. As we got further into the drive, we realized that we were told to go back in the same direction as the GPS rerouted us back to the same coordinates that they were at. Needless to say, we did not go back, but we all returned home and felt sick all night. Some time had passed and I told another friend of mine about this experience and he said he wanted to go there because he had never experienced anything like it. We went and he started feeling sick as we pulled up again, so he kept driving and left. Later on that night he was home with only his girlfriend and they both heard what seemed to be something running up to the door and violently slamming on it, which also knocked some stuff on the shelves down, but when they went looking through the house there was nobody there. I can't find any information on anything like this, and I'm very tempted to go back, but I can't get myself to actually do it just yet out of fear and lack of understanding. Humanoid cryptid. This story isn't an account of mine but rather the account of my uncle. Nonetheless, it still has this creepiness, which might make for good discussion material. This is a relatively short story. It takes place during my uncle's childhood. He lived in a small town that had a campground on a lake near it. His family spent much of their time there during the summer months. When he was about 14 to 15, he said he and a group of 5 teens/kids were going back to their campsite for the night after a day at the lake. As they were walking on the trail back, a humanoid creature came walking out of the brush and crossed the path. He told me that it was the ugliest thing that he had ever seen. It walked on all fours but still would appear to be able to walk like a human. He said it had gray skin, a huge oval head, ratted hair, and red eyes. He said that the creature glanced at them before crossing the path into the woods. The entire group of kids was terrified. Being an enthusiast for cryptozoology, ETs, etc., I immediately thought of the cryptid known as the Dover Demon. I still live in the area, and the campground is now closed, though it is all private property. I'd like to investigate it someday. Share your thoughts and opinions, I'd enjoy a good discussion. My desert encounter. The time was December 23, 1978, at 1 a.m. I remember the date clearly as I was 10 years old, and Christmas was just 2 days away. I always tell the story the same way as it's burnt in my mind like it was yesterday. I lived on a mesa in Safford, Arizona. A mesa is a raised plane of earth above the surrounding area resembling a table. There were 4 other families that lived on the mesa. Our farm was a 40-acre piece of land with our nearest neighbors being 1/4 mile away. I was awoken, and for lack of a better term, pulled to my bedroom window, which faced the Graham Mountains, where during the day I could see the road that went to the top of the mountain. There were no home or building anywhere in that direction, at least not in 1978. What I saw about 200 yards away was a classic silver UFO with the 2 halves that separated the craft, a bar of pulsing light that went clockwise in direction, and a ramp coming from an opening, and at the bottom of the ramp were 3 aliens whom I could see clearly, unclothed, gray with huge eyes and very spindly arms, short, but upon seeing them at this distance, I heard them inside my head, and upon hearing them talking to each other in incomprehensible language, I realized I wasn't able to move any part of my body, and this caused my heart to race, and I guessed one of them noticed, and to calm me down, informed me I was being given a gift and to not worry, I would be thankful for it. It was like my brain was a filing cabinet, and they were rifling through it, and I've always had the feeling that they either left something or modified something, as after going to sleep, which I don't remember how that took place, the following days had amazing things take place, but I'll get to that later. I awoke that morning and went to my friend's house 1/4 mile away and told him about this experience, and he said, "Let's go to where you saw the ship." We got there, and where it had been was a brand new green plant on the otherwise lifeless or occasional creosote bush randomly strewn around. This was a solid, bright green circle the size of the craft I'd seen. The next night was the night before Christmas, and after falling asleep, I awoke floating out of my body in the lotus position, the kind the yogis do, and looked down at my sleeping body. I was on autopilot, just along for the ride, and this included going through my closed bedroom door. I didn't feel anything as you might expect. I saw everything that was under the tree but unwrapped, the Stretch Armstrong, the Rock'em Sock'em robots, etc. went back floating about 3 feet above the ground again through the closed door and back into my sleeping body. Since that happened, I know that it occurred but still believe the gift I was supposedly given isn't really a gift. On occasion, for no particular reason, words will come out of my mouth about something in the very near future that will occur. On many occasions, I've just said something to my wife, like once while driving. I said, 2 of those 4 guys on the gold wings will be dead only an hour later. Before going on the bridge to the first key in Florida, we'd witnessed 2 of the 4 bikers weeping over the 2 dead bodies on the side of the highway, and once out of many such similar occurrences, I was benefited by hearing a warning in my head and then physically pulled backward before a 6-zone 1.5-inch rotary valve that I was directly over. Particularly, my head exploded and went 80 feet into the air and onto the next street. That would have killed me and many other similar things, usually regarding people about to die in a motor vehicle accident. Some gift, huh? I do attribute them to my experience that night. I've never written in any of these groups but thought I'd share this one. Not sure why, hope I made sense. I don't have much of a gift for writing. Flying humanoids, the Houston Batman. There are classifications of cryptids into categories such as mammals, hominids, birds, legendary, extraterrestrial, and so on. One unusual group listed in cryptozoology involves creatures labeled as winged humanoids. They are beings with human-like or shaped bodies possessing the ability of flight by means of feather or bat-like wings. The New Jersey Devil, the Mothman, and the Owlman of Cornwall would fall under this category along with a lesser-known cryptid, the Houston Batman. In 1953, among the headlines of the Houston Chronicle was an article reporting a frightening encounter with the unknown creature that would later be called the Houston Batman or Horror. A 23-year-old housewife, Hilda Walker, along with 2 of her neighbors, Judy Meyer and Howard Phillip, was sitting on the front porch talking. Hilda suddenly noticed a large shadow moving across the yard. She pointed out to the others what she observed, and they all became frozen in fear after they found the source of the shadow. All 3 claimed to witness what appeared to be a man flying above the houses. They described its body as human-shaped, dressed in a body-tight black outfit resembling a paratrooper's suit, with a pair of attached bat-style wings. The creature was said to stand over 6 feet in height and surrounded in a glowing haze, yellow in color. It flew around for a few minutes and then suddenly vanished from the witness's sight. Hilda reported the incident to local police the following morning, which eventually was picked up by the local news media. Over the decades, there have been other unconfirmed sightings of the Houston Batman during the late 80s, mid-90s, and early 2000s as posts on the internet. The creature's true nature has been a heated topic of debate. Some cryptozoologists theorize it to be an unknown species much like the New Jersey Devil. Now just to note, during the same time, people reported spotting UFOs over Houston, resulting in suggestions that the being was an alien. There have been conspiracy theories to imply the creature was Spring-Heeled Jack that once terrorized the streets of London in the late 19th century, as both carry similar characteristics. Many speculate the Houston Horror was nothing more than a played-out hoax on Hilda Walker and her neighbors. Sightings of flying humanoids are truly one of the world's most bizarre mysteries, as the Houston Batman is not an isolated occurrence in Texas. In some southern states and Mexico during the early 2000s, a new phenomenon unfolded involving reported sightings of unidentified flying humanoids. People were witnessing human or human-like creatures flying, hovering, or floating in the air with any noticeable means, such as wings. The internet holds many video recordings of such encounters along with a mountain of theories. The Moose Man, Wendigo. This is a true story of an experience I had as a child with what I knew at the time as the Moose Man, but which I now suspect was a Wendigo. I have told several of my close friends about this, and I think back to it often, wanting to write it down. When I was a child, my family would go to my grandmother's house for Thanksgiving. I was one of the youngest of our cousins, of which there is a large group. My grandmother had a secluded home, backed up to expansive woods. Her house was adorned with Native American artwork and artifacts. My cousins and I would go off and explore the woods behind her house together, walking atop old rock walls and playing with the frogs in nearby ponds. The air was sweet and thick back there. The area was historically home to a large Native American population, and there were some intriguing features in the woods evidencing that history, including an abandoned sweat lodge covered in animal hides, which I was always too afraid to explore, and old stone arrowheads in the dirt. One Thanksgiving, one of my older cousins and I paired off from a larger group when we were back in the woods, seeking to explore further into the woods than we had ever gone. We walked about 15 minutes or so through a fairly thick, unfamiliar portion of the woods when we arrived at the top of a large rock outcropping at the edge of a steep embankment. The hair on my arm still stands up thinking about this, and it is right now as I write this, but I saw a tall humanoid figure in ragged clothes at the bottom of the embankment, about 30 to 40 feet down, facing away from me and my cousin. I was curious but wary, wondering if the figure were a dummy or maybe someone that was injured and needed our help. I considered calling out but saw the figure move slightly, and suddenly I was full of fear. Without making a sound, I tapped my cousin and signaled for him to look down at the figure. We looked back up at each other. I was hoping for a sense of reassurance, but I could see a dread in his eyes that shot down my spine. When we looked back down at the figure, it turned towards us. This tall, lanky, ragged humanoid figure had the face of a moose, and it was looking dead at me. We locked eyes, and I can't explain why, but I knew that it wanted to eat me. We didn't wait, we didn't even scream. My cousin and I ran away as fast as we could possibly run, back the same way that we came. As I ran, I could feel that we were being pursued, and I was younger and a step slower than my cousin. The air grew thicker and hazier, and the woods changed around us. All of a sudden, my cousin and I came into a clearing in the woods that did not exist when we had passed through originally. The air there was particularly thick, almost green, with fireflies floating around. The ground in the clearing was marked with circles of mushrooms, fairy rings. It was very disorienting, and it felt like the clearing was luring me to stay forever. All of a sudden, I heard my mom call out to me through the woods. She, along with some of my uncles and aunts, came to look for me and my cousin. We were the last two in the woods, and it was getting darker. It was time to sit for Thanksgiving dinner. Her call pierced through the fog of this experience, breaking whatever curse was on me and my cousin and allowing us to escape. My cousin and I told the others what we had seen, that we had been pursued by a moose man who wanted to eat us, but obviously nobody believed us. I probably wouldn't have believed my own senses either, if not for what happened next. After dinner, all of the kids went back outside to play in the yard, running behind sheds and cutting in and out of the woods at the edge of the yard, evading and capturing each other in a game called Manhunt. I was still afraid from before but took comfort in numbers and proximity to the house. As a large group of us were trying to locate the last of the fugitives, one of my cousins shone a big flashlight into the woods. There, our whole group saw one of our fugitive cousins in a bush, and standing right behind him, a tall, ragged humanoid figure with the head of a moose towering over the bush. We all screamed and sprinted back inside. That was the end of the games that day. Sometimes I bring up this event with my cousins to see if they still remember. They do remember, but they hate to talk about it. The creature I saw was in our garden shed. This event happened when I was around 8 or 10 years old in the garden of the house I used to live in. I'm telling this story as I remember it without fabricating anything whatsoever. One day I was playing in my garden. I liked to play with the ball I had or look through the chain-link fence that separated our family's property from a river. Now to explain the situation that occurred, I need to explain the shed we had in the garden. Now this shed was placed directly at the back of the garden, in the middle of the chain link fence. This meant I could enter the shed from the front, go to the right side of the shed or the left, but not the back as it was placed in front of the fence. Another important note is that the right wall of the shed had a window that would grant you vision of the inside of the entire shed. One of the things I really enjoyed doing was walking over to the right side of the shed, knocking the window 3 times, ducking down, then getting up and looking directly at the window. I remember doing this because it was fun for little me, but of course nothing would ever show itself, and I only did this as a way to roleplay. This day was very different. Although parts of my memory are hazy, I remember the main event with perfect detail. I was watching the river through the fence, then I walked to the right side of the shed. I knocked on the window 3 times and ducked down. When I jumped back up and looked through the window, a pale, white humanoid thing sprouted up and looked at me. I remember it looked me in the eyes, then it opened its mouth and started moving it. It wasn't moving it in a way as if it were talking, it was just moving its lower jaw really fast. It's hard to describe, it was just moving its mouth really quick, and I felt maliciousness coming from this creature. After that, it just ducked back down just as quickly as it had come. The situation must have been 5 seconds long, and I remember just staring at the window dumbfounded, completely shocked at what I saw. Even though remembering this situation now makes me really creeped out and scared, 8-10-year-old me was more curious and perplexed than scared, so I did what any curious child would have done and entered the shed. After all, there was only one way in and out, which was the front door. The only window of the shed could not be opened anyway, so that thing should have been inside. When I walked into the shed, I saw nothing. The shed itself is really small, so there would have been nowhere to hide. I just remember being confused more than anything, so I closed the door and continued playing outside. Looking back at the situation as an adult, I would have absolutely run away, as the thing was only human-shaped but definitely not from our world. Also, I get scared easily as well. This situation only happened once to me and never again, even though I played the window knocking ritual dozens of times after the event. I wouldn't be surprised if it was an overactive imagination, and I'm definitely open to that idea. The only problem was that the creature felt so real, and I can't imagine young me conjuring such a creepy thing from my mind. I also thought that maybe it was my reflection being slightly distorted as it rose up at a similar time I did. The only problem with that theory is that the creature ducked down while I was still standing up. If you guys have any theories, suggestions, ideas, or just some questions, then feel free to let me know what you think. Thanks for listening to this story. I've never told this story except to family. Something had taken up residence in my childhood home. Luckily, my mom and her family believe in the paranormal. So, they didn't usually doubt me, but almost no one saw what I saw. A few different things happened to all of us at different times, but this is the freakiest. Whatever was there wasn't malevolent, but it liked to mess with us, especially me. Maybe it didn't like kids a whole lot? Back in the 80s, you could leave kids alone for a short amount of time. I have 2 older siblings who are in charge. This happened twice. When my mom went to run errands, Dad was at work. My mom called me from the hall. I went there, thinking it was my mom, but it wasn't. I can tell you the exact outfits not mom was wearing when these visits happened. I said, "Mom?" It just kind of smiled at me. From another room, my brother said, "Mom's at the store, dummy." When I turned around, the word "not mom" had vanished. It happened again not long after. I told my siblings, but since they didn't see it and I was the youngest, they weren't convinced. They had their own experiences, so I don't doubt for a second what I saw. It was daylight, I was awake. I wasn't sick or anything. It really freaked me out, I can assure you. I also saw disembodied hands and a black cat that stayed under my bed. We didn't have black cats, and I made my mom look under the bed before I'd get in it to make sure none of our cats were there. My sister and I also heard footsteps on the roof when no one was there. I was super scared, so she told me it was Santa. A camouflaged humanoid/dog/cougar walks across the field in front of me. This story took place when I was 15 or 16. I had snuck out to smoke a blunt and chill with a boy I liked at the time. We'll call him Lames. Lames and I were at this local elementary school where kids our age would go late at night to hang out on the playground and smoke, kiss, or whatever. It was around 2 or 3 a.m. I live in Oklahoma, and unfortunately there isn't a lot to do here even though I live in the capital city. Now this elementary school, call it Westlake Elementary School, has a big field separating the playground area from a huge, dense forest. So we're sitting on the jungle gym, and Lames tells me he found an app that has really creepy voice ringtones. He begins to show me a few, but when he reaches a particularly frightening one, which I can still hear perfectly to this day, he stops. It's a ghostly voice that sounds like it's coming from all around you, whispering, "I see you," slowly and menacingly. Think Deathly Hallows Part 2 when Voldemort gets inside everyone's head at Hogwarts to tell them to bring Harry to him or die. It really freaked me out, seeing how it was late and dark. As I'm telling him to turn it off, something makes me look up towards the big field and the forest. Crossing the big field on all fours with unnaturally long arms and legs was what I can only describe as a humanoid shape walking with the exact same grace and slinking movements of a lion or other big cat. Only it had a human-shaped head and clearly human arms and legs/freaky ducking hands. It was probably 30 feet away from us, but I know what I saw. That's not even the craziest part, though. The craziest part is this thing was like invisible or camouflaged or something. Please stay with me here. This is my 100% honest, real account of something that terrifies and perplexes me to this day. The only reason we could see this thing walking or whatever was because the light and fences would move around it as it passed by. I wish I could explain it better, but that's all I can think to say. Lame saw it too, and we were both so terrified we could barely speak. We sat in dead, petrified silence as it crossed the field and disappeared into the forest. I don't know if it didn't see us or didn't care, but nothing ever happened. The only other time I have been that scared and really felt I was about to die was when my friends and I had a gun pulled on us. I experienced a sense of dread and uncertainty about what might happen next. I've looked into local legends and haven't found anything. I know that sounds crazy. Has anyone else seen anything similar to this? Luckily, I had Lames with me to witness this, or I would seriously question if I saw it at all. We both saw it, though, and we were both horrified. Dark humanoid figure at Fort Sill. At the time, I was at Fort Sill for some training. It was an interesting place to be. We would spend the weekends sitting around playing video games or going on liberty to explore the only mall in Lawton. Occasionally we would be selected for fire watch or duty. One Saturday I had fire watch. It wasn't a major concern. I made the decision to spend most of the time in my room and occasionally venture out. We had a gym below the main floor. We would spend a lot of time in that gym. Firewatch was sometimes tasked with cleaning it up. There was a small walled-off section, though. It used to contain an electric chair. I'm still unsure about the history of the building we were at, but it was next to a large cemetery. We would hear the occasional creepy story about the building and the electric chair. Anyway, I digress. That night I was asked to clean the gym and then to mop the third deck. At the time, no one lived on third deck. My buddy and I cleaned the gym and then walked up the stairs to mop. He mopped from the end to the middle, and I proceeded to mop the rest of the way to the stairs. We finished mopping. My friend went to go skate in his room while I told Duty we were done. I walked back up the stairs to grab the mop bucket. I got up there, and I realized someone had walked all over the floor that we just mopped. So I looked down the hallway. When I did, I saw a human-like figure. Except it was black. It was the deepest shade of black I have ever encountered. I felt this wave of uncertainty and fear wash over me. Something I have never felt before. I sprinted down the stairs and ran to my room, waking my roommate up. He thought I was messing with him when I told him what happened. After that, I never saw the figure again while I was there. It was honestly one of the most disturbing experiences of my life. There was a strange, yellow, creamish-colored humanoid in the forest. A few years ago, I saw something weird in Cumming, Georgia, in someone's backyard by a small creek. The fall was calm and quiet at 4 to 5 p.m., with birds in the background. I was with a few friends and my brother at the time. We noticed this figure, and it stood out because of how strange it looked. It was cream-colored or off-white and didn't have any facial features at all. The head looked football-shaped, not exactly a football, more like an elongated oval, and the rest of the figure seemed pretty human-like in shape mixed with alien. It was around the same height or maybe a little taller than a normal person, and it had a slim build, not fat, but not muscular either. At first, it was just standing there, staring at some sticks it had in its hand. After a while, it looked up and stared at us. It didn't move or make any sound, just stood there watching us. We ended up running away after that. I wasn't really scared at the time because I was like 7 or 8. The area around us was completely still, with no breeze or movement in the trees. It felt too quiet. The stillness added to the weirdness of the whole experience. About a year or two later, I went back to that area with just a friend and my brother, and I saw it again, only this time it was closer, maybe about 150 feet away. It was still staring at us, just standing there and not doing anything else. It didn't approach us fast, but it slowly hovered towards us. I definitely knew it was aware of us. After that, I never saw it again. If anyone has seen this or knows what it is, please let me know. An off-white or cream-colored humanoid with a football-shaped head and no facial features. Around average height, maybe a bit taller. New Zealand creature/ghost? Sighting in Christchurch red zone. So in Christchurch about a decade ago, there was an earthquake that resulted in the demolishing of a large urban area, which is the red zone. My friend lives right next to the red zone. She is right on the edge of where the demolishing happened. Every now and then I would go to her house, and we would go on walks in the night. About 3 years ago, when it was just the two of us, we ventured quite far into the forbidden territory. Around a point where there used to be a house, we saw what looked like a short, probably like 4 to 5 feet, hunched person near a huge bush. We assumed it was like a crackhead or something. When I saw it, I got a lump in my throat and got goosebumps, but my friend went ahead and tried to talk to it. When she said what's up, there was this weird animalistic noise, sort of like an NZ possum if you've ever heard one, and then it stood up and ran into a bush on its hind legs. We were both really confused and tried to find it in the bush but couldn't see anything. I got really worried at this point and asked if we could go home. As we walked back, we started to get lost, even though it's usually really easy to find your way around. We'd walked for like 5 minutes before seeing the figure, but it took us nearly half an hour to get back home. When we did, I couldn't sleep that night and felt myself sweating really bad even though it wasn't hot. My friend felt the same. Does anyone have a similar encounter or know what this might have been? Most people don't believe me, and I feel insane, but my friend remembers it vividly too. We weren't on drugs, except for some weed, and it definitely wasn't an animal. No animal in Christchurch is that big. If someone could shed some light on this, it would be great. I have never seen anything like it before or since. Country roads and phantom homes. Okay, so this one is a bit odd. Back in 2018, I was working for Domino's, delivering pizzas in the northern part of Texas, east of Dallas, in the countryside. It was a typical summer evening when I was delivering pizzas, earning plenty of tips due to the constant heat and the comfort of heated seats. I am nearing the end of the day. The sun is starting to set as I pull onto an old country road I had been on dozens of times already, including twice that very day. I take a curve and see movement in the trees, then I crest over a small hill to see an old, rotten, burnt home in what I know is an empty field. I had previously delivered a pizza to the property across the road from the parking lot, and I had even parked in the empty driveway leading to the field. I went ahead and drove down another block to my delivery, feeling like something was watching me from the burnt house. I spent a few extra minutes chatting with the people I delivered to before heading back up the road, but when I looked to where the burnt house had been, it was gone, the field empty. I figured I'd just hallucinated it, but a few days later the same thing happened. The house was there, I felt like I was being watched, but if I didn't view it for more than a few minutes, it would disappear. However, this wasn't the only strange occurrence. In other areas, buildings would seemingly appear and disappear, along with movement along the sides of the road. Though the thing that finally made me quit was when I had finished my shift but did a ride-along with my buddy. After delivering the food, we planned to hang out at my house and get my car later since we were off the next day. We deliver the pizzas, and the GPS suddenly goes blank, then the redirecting notification starts spamming, and his lights flicker as we take a turn down a dark road with no house lights in sight. The feeling of being watched begins to crawl and the road is dirt and small gravel. So we drive down a quarter mile, and suddenly the car is forced to a stop as the road looks solid but gives way under us, trapping it in mud. The road had looked the same as we drove through, but we both freaked as the car rocked and stopped in place from the collapse. We got out to see how awful it was. His lights were flickering, and the car was stuck. We checked the GPS to see how far we were from a main road. Seeing the road continue, supposedly linking to the one next to mine, we decided to start walking, as we had over 2 hours to wait for a tow. It was well and truly dark. The feeling of being watched and the sound of movement increased. We both kept our phone flashlights on, one pointed forward and the other backwards, as we felt we weren't safe. My buddy jumped, saying he saw something bolt across the road behind us. I then heard noises in front of us, seeing 3 sets of eyes glowing just beyond the light from my phone. The eyes were lower to the ground, but as I took a step back, bumping into my buddy, they got higher up, being at human height. My buddy jumped again, bumping into me as he started running towards the eyes, but when I looked at him, then back, the eyes were gone. We ran the rest of the way down the road, but we came to find out it was blocked out by a big fence with multiple no trespassing/trespassers will be shot/we don't call 911 signs posted on it. We both were scared shitless knowing we'd either have to go back the way we came or risk the quarter-mile property of a person who clearly doesn't like people in his property and potentially get shot at. We chose to go back, and oh boy, the sounds and feelings of not being alone were heavy. the feeling of something breathing down the back of our necks as we ran back to the car. When we got back close enough, my buddy remote started the car to make the lights turn on, but they kept glitching and flashing. As we got to the car, I heard the sound of a truck backing down the road toward us. The tow truck had arrived, and their lights flicked on strong, flooding the road with light, and in the brief moment I looked back, I saw 3 humanoids, very gaunt and feral looking, with gray skin, but as quick as I saw them, they bolted into the trees. We proceeded to run to the front of the tow truck that was waiting in the light of their headlights as they loaded my buddy's car onto the flatbed. They commented that we must have run through some barbed wire, causing significant damage to the car. However, we are certain that we didn't, and those scratches weren't present before we abandoned the car to walk. We don't know exactly what happened, just know that we refused to go anywhere near that road ever again. Tall figure on the side of the road. I live in northern New England. A couple of years ago my, then, girlfriend and I were out for a drive late at night, probably around 1 a.m. The roads had been mostly dead, except for the occasional passing car, and it was a completely clear night. I decided I was going to get lost and just see where the road takes us, then GPS back to her place when we were tired. I had been taking random turns for about a half hour when I came upon something odd. A car was coming towards us, but both of its headlights were flashing, not like high beams going on and off, more like a light bulb about to burn out. I mentioned it to my girlfriend, as I had never seen car lights do something like that before, but we shrugged it off as electrical problems and kept going. We turned left at the next stop sign, and that's when I began to notice that the porch lights of the nearby houses were doing the same thing. They dimmed and brightened in the same steady pattern as the headlights that had just passed. We took a left, and the hair stood up on the back of my neck as the road ahead dipped into a small, dark valley, a complete blind spot. As my car entered it, both of our right ears popped painfully, and the smell of sulfur assaulted our noses. My headlights flooded the space. We were surrounded by forest on either side, but on the right was a driveway with a mailbox next to it. Standing to the right of the mailbox, in the tall grass, was something indescribable, some sort of hunched over, slender creature a few feet taller than the box itself peering our way. From the little I can recollect, it was only very vaguely humanoid. In that moment, the only thing I remember feeling was dread and the adrenaline from my body's flight response. We were out of the blind spot as quickly as we entered, and I've never seen anything like that since. The strangest thing is that the next day, I could no longer fully recollect the memory of the event, only the feelings I felt as we saw it, and the verbal descriptions both of us recounted to each other in the immediate moments after the event. I see the memory in my mind as if it's blurred out in a dark splotch, like someone spilled ink over the spot the creature was standing. My ex says the same. I don't know what could cause it to be blanked out of my head like that, but I've never had an experience like it before, and everything about it unsettles me immensely. I'm not sure if anyone here has had any similar experiences, but this was one of the creepiest things that's ever happened to me. Does anyone know what we could have seen? Scariest moment of my life. My buddy and I were driving around at night just catching up after a while around 11:45 p.m. At 2:20 a.m., I went to this pond we drove past that I had visited with another friend. It was behind a neighborhood, and there was a gate. Anyway, we went in, and obviously it was kind of creepy because it was dark and there wasn't much light. As soon as we walked up near the pond, we heard geese, and I even scared my buddy and got him pretty good. We kept walking, and we heard a noise and stopped. To the left, there was a path to the other side of the pond that went down for a bit and didn't really have much light except for a little bit at the end. As soon as we got there and I looked down to the end of the path, I thought I saw something and started looking a bit closer, and instantly I started feeling cold and got chills. I was terrified, but I couldn't help but keep looking. I saw what looked like 3 white humanoid figures standing in a line at the end of the path. Obviously it wasn't very bright, so I couldn't see very well, but I could make out limbs and what looked like heads. When I looked down, it looked like something was moving by their feet or floating, and you could see the shadow, and then suddenly 2 of them disappeared and the third flashed, but when it flashed, it was either bigger or had gotten closer. As soon as that happened, my friend and I ran to the car, and I slammed on the gas, and we drove off. The ride back was dead silent, and when we finally got to his house to drop him off, he asked me if I saw them too. I don't know if maybe I was just being silly or because it was dark. I saw something that wasn't there, but I've never really had an experience like this before. It was genuinely the most scared I have ever felt, and I thought of maybe seeing if other people had similar stories. I'm writing this in bed with the lights on because I can't sleep now. Never going binge drinking in that log cabin ever again. I'm a big fan of horror stories. There's nothing better than sitting at home on a cold, rainy day, listening to allegedly true horror stories wrapped tight in a giant blanket, pretending to be a human burrito. But listening to these stories and actually experiencing them is a road I never wish to cross again. I, myself, am an 18-year-old dude from a small country in Europe. I have a great body build, from all those years in the gym and an excess amount of protein. I lived my whole life in one of the biggest cities in my country, but I never shied away from going to the countryside to get a bit of that countryman life. So in the summer of 2019, I and two of my friends, Martin and a guy everybody calls Wolf, decided to go binge drinking in a log cabin that was located 35 miles from the nearest city. It doesn't seem that far, but none of us had a driver's license at that time. So at about 7 p.m. we hopped on a train and went to the woods. From there we had to walk about 3 miles to the glorious 2-story log cabin. Inside, on the ground floor, there was a kitchen and a bedroom. Upstairs, on the second floor, there was a small hallway that led to another bedroom with separate beds. I and Wolf established our presence in the second floor bedroom, and Martin settled down in the ground floor bedroom, like the little loner he is. We were prepping food and drinks, listening to music, never minding that we were located in the middle of the woods miles from the nearest civilization, but we had lots of drinks and snacks. What else do we need, am I right? About half a mile from the cabin, there was a giant pond. After a few beers, we went there thinking we could go for a swim, but seeing the unnaturally dark water and a little forest of reeds, we decided that it's not worth the risk of getting rashes from the dirty water or cutting our legs on litter that probably roams the bottom, and went back to our cabin. The evening was extraordinarily beautiful and peaceful. The red and purple sky was stunning, accompanied by the giant bonfire we made for the night, full of marshmallow roasting and drinking. When the night came, we were quick to drink, and at about 1 a.m. we were all in a good state of drunkenness. Some more than others because Martin was already passed out in his folding chair. Wolf and I carried him to his room and put him in bed, leaving all doors wide open. Everything outside was pitch black, and our smart asses didn't bring a flashlight. But with one friend sleeping and us getting bored, we decided to walk back to that pond we went to previously and make a small campfire there. But as we got near the trail that leads to the woods, we heard leaves crunching and twigs snapping like somebody was quickly walking just behind the trees about 30 feet in front of us. We quickly stopped. Wolf whispered, "Yo, I think there's someone there." "It can't be, it's a private territory, it must be the wind or something," I said. Being quite drunk and acting brave, I loudly shouted, "If there's someone there, put your D high up in the air." Yeah, very mature, I know. But then the sound stopped, as if the thing making them never existed. Not being able to see because of the darkness, we got a bit creeped out and started to walk back to the cabin, talking about how amusing it would be if somebody actually lifted theirs after me saying that. But what I heard then made my heart sink. From the inside of the cabin, we heard an ear-piercing scream. It was Martin. We rushed to the entrance of the cabin, and then we saw it, a pale, gray-skinned humanoid creature. It was about 5 feet tall with disproportionately long arms and webbed fingers. Its legs bent backward and were super skinny, the face had 2 giant black eyes, and the mouth was opened, showing a row of long pointy teeth. The creature was holding Martin's leg while he was screaming inhumanly loud. I never thought a human could produce such a high-pitched scream. The thing had to have run past us at some point and gotten inside the cabin. I was so scared I wanted to piss myself. We had to somehow get past that thing and get inside. Thinking quickly, we picked the biggest pieces of firewood and started throwing them at the creature. We both missed, but luckily it let go of Martin's leg and jumped back in the forest darkness. We quickly dragged Martin inside, closed all the windows and doors, and locked ourselves in the second floor bedroom, backs pressed to the door. Martin sustained severe scratches on his leg. We poured vodka on the wound and DIY bandaged his leg. The rest of the night we heard scratching at the entrance door and windows. We were afraid that it would break the windows and get inside. But it didn't. At one point the scratching stopped, so Wolf went to the window and checked if it was gone, but to his horror it was standing outside the window looking straight at him. When the sun came up, we checked through all the windows for the creature. The creature had vanished. We needed to escape the woods. After a couple of hours of constant bickering, we finally found common ground and began sprinting as quickly as we could. The journey to the train station was the longest in my life. I was afraid to see that creature again. But we managed to get home safe. We didn't tell anyone what we saw. Nobody would believe us, like I never believed those scary stories I listened to. The creature was similar looking to the Dover demon, but not quite it. I still don't know why the creature didn't attack me and Wolf. Maybe it saw Martin as easy prey while he was in his drunken state, but well, I'm happy it all ended well. I think the creature came from that pond. Those webbed hands indicate that the creature is semi-aquatic. So whenever I'm right or not, I'm super glad that we didn't go for a swim there, It could have ended much worse if we had. Mimicking humanoid encounters? I was about 9 years old and visiting my dad's house for the weekend. I was sitting on the floor coloring at the coffee table in the living room when I heard my dad's voice behind me say, "Hey!" Very playfully, like a slightly raised voice as if trying to get my attention to show me or tell me something fun. So I turned around to look in the direction of the voice, and I saw my dad peeking around the corner from the hallway. It was just his head, like he was leaning out from the hallway, and he was smiling like he was being playful. So I turned back around just really quickly to cap my marker and stand up to go see what he wanted. But when I turned back around, he was gone. So I said hey back, kind of in the same way but with, like, a hey, what did you want? Kind of tone, no response. So again, I called out a little louder and with a slightly more annoyed tone, "Dad, hello, what?" Waited, no response. I got up and walked down the hallway I had seen him coming from, but he wasn't there. I then followed the hallway to his room, but he wasn't there, nor was he in his bathroom. This was a small house, BTW, literally a trailer. There are no other rooms back there, there's only one small hallway leading that way that ends at his room. No exits from this end of the house and very small inconvenient windows with decorations, not something he would ever climb through unless an emergency. So really only one way in and one way out. So at this point my heart is pounding and has dropped down into my stomach because I'm like, WTF is going on? So now I'm yelling his name and walking through the house, very small, as I said, literally like 10 steps from his room at the end to where I had been sitting, and I finally go outside, and he is in his shed in the backyard. Woodworking with power tools and goggles and gloves and all that gear on like he had been doing that for hours. And, knowing there was no possible way he could have gotten past me to get outside without me seeing, I still asked him if he was just inside and did he just say hey to me while I was in the living room at the table? And of course he said, "No, I've been out here." And literally nothing else like that ever happened again. I never figured it out. Little humanoids fishing. I grew up in a small town on the southern Oregon coast. There wasn't a whole lot for a teenager to do there, so we had to get creative. One of our favorite activities was to drive around and appreciate the raw natural beauty of the area and explore the many trails, vistas, beaches, and such. We would greatly enhance the experience by taking a threshold dose, 100 micrograms, of Lucy. This, of course, is not smart and could have gone horribly wrong. We were on a night voyage one time. There were 3 of us in my '91 Honda Accord. We found ourselves in Crescent City, California, at around 3 a.m. The town appeared eerily vacant as we aimlessly cruised its streets. Coastal fog blanketed the silent city. Suddenly a massive beam of light, level with the ground, passed over us, about 50 in the air. It kept happening, and each time I could hear and feel it smoothly ripping through the sky. Filled with excitement, we began driving toward the source, which, of course, was a lighthouse. We all got out and enjoyed watching the beam for a while. Then we noticed a pier stretching out over the water. We walked down and onto the wooden pier when we noticed that we were not alone. About halfway down the pier was a group of 4 or 5 small figures. We were a little surprised to see anyone out there, and we were all feeling spooked, but, unable to make the decision to turn around, we kept walking. "Just act normal," whispered one of my friends. We awkwardly walked right past these figures. They were 4 tall at most, covered head to toe in a patchwork of brown fabric complete with hoods, face covers, and gloves. They carried with them some kind of woven baskets. We were very spooked, and my heart was racing, but they seemed even more agitated by our presence. Making very odd click/squeak sounds to each other, they kind of scrambled around as we passed them. It was also very odd, we noticed, that the pier was covered in sea life. There were fish flopping around here and there, many crabs skittering around, some of them finding their way over the edge and back into the water, and fresh clumps of seaweed. None of us looked back for a while. When we did, we saw that they were leaving. We watched, dumbfounded, as they exited the pier and all piled into a Ford tourist station wagon and drove away. Relieved that they were gone, we all stood at the end of the pier for quite a while discussing this weird situation while the beam continued circling the sky. We all had witnessed the same thing. We were high but not hallucinating. Did our enhanced state of awareness allow us to see them when they are normally cloaked to normal humans? How did all the sea life get up onto the pier? It was a good 10 off the water. Did they haul it out with a net and dump it out on the pier to collect with their wicker baskets? That would be really heavy for those little guys, but it seems like, however they do it, they were harvesting seafood. We referred to them afterward as Ewoks even though you wouldn't be able to tell if they were furry or not. Crescent City is surrounded by redwood forest, which is where Ewoks live. Right? I am uncertain as to their nature, however, they appeared to be quite tangible and did not appear to be human. My most intense encounter was with some shape-shifting entity that I didn't realize resembled Slender Man until I showed my cousin some drawings and described it to him. I hate talking about this, but, I could tell where it was in the room. It stood tall and had a blank face, resembling scribbles. I remember looking at this plant near me, and it was like looking at it through a waterfall, which I believe is from this creature's energy. I didn't want to give it any attention, but it kept trying to speak to me, loudly. It was impossible to block out. This was at 4 a.m., I put on some albums, but it stayed around. If I closed my eyes, I would get weird visions. When I finally got to sleep, I knew that I was lucid dreaming, and I could not control my dreamscape like I should have. I knew that it had control, and I was trying to remember everything it was doing, but it added memorable weird stuff, which worked in distracting me. What memory I do have is of my mom being there, but it wasn't really her. She had a third eye, just like her other two, and leaned back, making a possessed hissing noise. I was frustrated at the entity when I woke up. I also forgot what had been said to me that night. I always forget when I hear spirit talking, but this time I remembered watch us. Or watch me. But not the last word of it. To add to this, my mother was spending the night. She was in my room, and I was sleeping on another floor. I asked if anything weird happened to her, but she said everything was fine. This happened in late September. I may have seen it walk out on my front porch a few nights before, if it was the same thing, same shape, but a 3D humanoid shadow. I retraced my steps to make sure it couldn't have been a trick with lighting, and there was no doubt. I had just been at a park then, and before the intense encounter, had spent a day by some woods. Whether that is significant, I do not know. It may have visited the other night again, I'm not sure, since this time it resembled a usual presence but also the shapeshifter, as its shape seemed to change. Despite my best efforts to ignore it, I experienced intense nightmares in less than an hour of sleep that bore a striking resemblance to the previous one. These nightmares featured extreme gore and my mother's presence, but this time, her eyes were dead and she did not respond to me. Sorry this is so long, I hope it makes sense. Since last autumn I've been wondering what this thing was but was unable to find anything useful. Tiny humanoid encounter. So, I'm a 25, almost 26-year-old female. I was about 8 or 9 when I experienced this, so it's been a while since I've thought about it. I've told my brother, and he didn't try to debunk it or anything, although he is skeptical, but he also does believe in some things. I woke up in the middle of the night. It was either a school night or a weekend night, around 2 a.m. I had woken up to use the bathroom and get a drink. I had a bunk bed at the time. I switched from bottom to top occasionally, and this time I was sleeping on the top in my room. I got down off the top bunk and proceeded to do my business. I was also wide awake instead of being in a half awake, half asleep state like most people normally are. I came back into my room after getting my drink and looked out my window. I have blinds on the window, and the blinds were open. As I looked into the yard, which is huge because we have 66 acres of land so the house sits pretty far back from the road, I looked over at the fire hydrant we have for the fire department to hook up to in case of a fire, and there was a small humanoid running around in circles around the hydrant. I was scared, but honestly really curious, and I stood and watched it run around the fire hydrant for a few moments until I decided to go back to bed. I wasn't scared, and I think about this from time to time. I don't know what it was, and I'm really curious to explain what this creature is/was. If anyone could help, that would be great. Shadow Man upstairs. I'll try to keep this relatively short, as there isn't a whole lot to it. When I was a kid, I would stay over at my grandfather's house every other day while my mother was out doing stuff. Normally I didn't feel scared of his house unless it was late at night, but something happened in the morning when I was 4 years old. This particular morning, my aunt, who was staying upstairs for a period of time, had left the house before either I or my grandfather had awoken. Later, my grandfather, assuming she was still upstairs, had left to run some errands. I would sleep in the same bed as him, so when I woke up, I noticed he wasn't in his bed and called out to him. After a few minutes, I began to panic, and I got out of bed to run upstairs to see if my aunt was there, and that's when I saw it. A tall, pitch black figure stood directly in front of her closed door. There were literally no features on this figure, and it stood completely motionless. My best description is that it looked like a three-dimensional, humanoid shadow. I began to creep towards it, but when I got close to it, I decided to just go back downstairs, still panicking with tears in my eyes. I wasn't scared of the shadow, but I guess my human nature kicked in and told me not to get within arm's length of something I didn't understand. My mother, discovering I was alone from talking to both my aunt and grandfather, sped over to his house as quickly as possible to pick me up. I was more afraid that I'd get in trouble for pissing the bed than I was of the shadow man upstairs. When I changed my clothes and got in the car, my mother asked me, "Did you try to go upstairs to see if your auntie was there?" To which I replied, "I tried to, but that man was standing in front of the door." Keep in mind, this is coming from a 4-year-old who barely grasps the concept of lying. Imagine hearing that from your kid randomly, of all things. Now that I'm an adult, I've learned from my mother that one night, when she was younger and staying over at my grandfather's house, she woke up and saw 2 men talking in the hallway, but she couldn't understand what they were saying. When she screamed to wake her dad up and turned back towards the hallway, they were gone. My grandfather's house is pretty old, so between these 2 experiences, I think there is at least one spirit haunting his house. I have not encountered any additional paranormal phenomena, with the exception of observing a shadow that appeared to be my dog running to the side of my bed. My friend also witnessed it. However, I will always remember the tall, featureless figure. We saw a pale humanoid. On the evening of November 30th and the early morning of December 1st, 2024, my friends and I had a meeting. We live in southern Arizona and are all staying the night at one friend's house for a birthday party. Her house is known between all of us as the haunted house since we're always experiencing weird things there. But this time, right after the sun had set, we were sitting on the porch in the backyard when one of us yelled and pointed at the chest-high brick fence, saying that she just saw a bald white human head poke itself over the fence. 2 of us immediately ran over and looked over the fence to see nothing. We laughed that off, but it was the first sighting of the night. We hung out outside a little longer until we decided to check over the fence again, and while we were doing so, we heard scuttering on the outside of the fence out of view. We joked about it and just went inside instead. Skip to a while later, we went outside again, and almost right away someone saw a head pop up around another fence. Again, we all thought it was nothing, but more of us started seeing a head, hands, and part of a back. At that point we were scared as hell and started going back inside when one friend stayed back and scared the living shit out of us, but she was just standing and looking. We stayed there for a while, now with one friend holding a broom. They lost their broom privileges soon after, and we kept seeing small things of white and some of the same things from before. Our other friends, who had been inside, returned, and they shook us to our core. We then began discussing the objects we had observed and the potential meanings behind them. And eventually 2 people heard a growling, and it was very clear they both weren't faking, and we all ran inside and started panicking, trying to reason with the fact there was a skinny, bald white man crawling outside. Eventually, we discovered this, and to our relief, it significantly alleviated our fears. This was our story. Believe it or not. Do you think it's real, or are we just crazy teenagers? Scary run-in with unidentifiable humanoid in storm drain. This occurred in 2023 in downtown Colorado Springs. We were exploring tunnels close to a river or a fountain creek open space. What is up, everyone? So a buddy and I had a pretty strange and utterly terrifying experience. We both enjoy urbexing and discovered a series of underground tunnels, like storm drains, that probably went as far as 1.5 miles. Anyway, we made our way to the tunnels, got our flashlights, and got my camera. We were just shooting the shit, and when we got maybe halfway through, the tunnel narrowed to where we were hunched over instead of being able to fully stand up. We then heard a loud scream that sounded like a lady but not human. Overall it sounded most like a mountain lion scream. Look it up. It's a terrifying sound. After we heard this, we both froze and listened. I was shining my light down the tunnel, where I saw something pale moving towards us. I probably only saw it for like 4 seconds until I broke out of my shock, and my buddy and I were running hunched over in these dark tunnels. I didn't have my camera video on, but I dropped it and sure as hell will never go back to retrieve it. I thought I was hallucinating or something, but my friend saw the exact same thing. The creature we saw was unlike anything I've ever seen. It was completely pale and looked sickly/emaciated. The body looked somewhat human, but not quite. The face resembled that of a horse, not as big of a snout, though. It was truly bizarre. If I had to compare it to anything, it would be the above image. The face especially looked like that of this particular picture of the Pope Lick monster. It's like if you took the head of the Pope Lick monster photo and placed it on the body of a deer standing on its hind legs. I still get the chills even just thinking about this experience. My friend and I vowed to never explore tunnels again, obviously. I always thought there was no such thing as humanoid creatures until I experienced this. I enjoyed listening to, like, skinwalker stories, but I always thought they were pure fiction. A deep part of me just wants to know what it is and if it was harmful. Did we escape a potentially deadly situation? Why are not more people seeing these things? There has to be more, right? Why does no one have legit photos of humanoids? If you have a similar experience or can imagine what this could have been, please share. I am utterly scared and baffled. A featureless humanoid entity latched onto my cousin for years. Before he became a pastor, my cousin always complained of seeing a bald, featureless entity in his dreams, but the strange thing is that when there is a party and his friends have to sleep over, they will also dream of a featureless, bald entity. Even his new schoolmates who just transferred to their school end up in one of his parties, and they sleep over and see the featureless, bald entity. How is that possible? He never told them about it. They stopped sleeping over because of this, save for his closest friends. I once spent the night at his boarding house after my house got flooded. But I never saw the entity, unlike his friends. Instead, in the wee hours of the morning, I woke up to a noise coming from his room. It was my cousin. He kept tossing and turning, and his arms were like he was fighting something or defending against something in his dream. Then he stood up and began throwing stuff against the wall. I simply left, closed the door, and went to sleep, exhausted from taking care of the furniture in my flooded house. I checked on him the next morning, and he was fine, and as I've expected, he had no recollection of what happened last night. His friends learned to just ignore it. Now, whenever he went home to his mother and siblings, they said they would feel something like a chilling cold wind and small items in the house change location as if they were being used by a bald, thin, faceless spirit. They know that their brother has returned home because the bald, featureless entity makes itself known. His older sister told us that when he was a child, he loved to play alone in the forest. It's like that's when he got the entity, and he's been following him ever since. Now in 2024 my cousin is a pastor in a church, and he didn't mention the entity again, and we assumed it's finally lost. Even his friends and family didn't feel its presence anymore, and they joked it must have been lost. Because as a young pastor my cousin went from one church to another. Churches were in another town, another city. The entity must have been overwhelmed by all the prayers and blessings they gave every day. I'm not religious, but I do know they perform some sort of ritual like wine as the blood of Jesus and bread as his body, that sort of stuff. A presence in the middle of the night. In September 2007, I was 19, and I decided to transfer to Rome with a friend to have some work experience. The apartment we found was quite nice and spacious, but it only had one bedroom. Therefore, I decided to convert the living room into a bedroom, where I slept. The owner told us his mother passed away just 1 month before our arrival, but we just don't care. We immediately fell in love with the house. After about 2 months of living there, we came across a photo of the woman who had passed away. Without thinking too much, I just brought the photo with some old things we found in a drawer in the room I slept in. I slept with the door locked because I'm obsessive, and I'm scared someone can enter while I'm sleeping, lol. One night I woke up around 2 a.m. without a reason, and I was completely sweaty. Just the time to open the eyes, and I saw a humanoid figure like a black silhouette. At the bottom of the room near the place, we bring the photo and the old stuff we found. When I just tried to call my friend's name to see if he was the figure that moved. The door closes and disappears. I was so scared, but after 1 hour of panic, I returned to sleep, and nothing happened again. The photo was still there, but I'm pretty sure the woman who owns the house didn't want us to move all her things. What do you think? Something is stalking outside my house. So for a few months now, something weird has been hanging around inside and outside my house. The first time it became apparent was when one night I was in the basement. Outside the window is a porch, and there is a light switch for the lights by the door. I went upstairs for a bit, and when I realized later I left the lights on, I went downstairs to turn them off. When I came down, the porch lights were on. Now my father has tried endlessly to hook them to a timer with no success to his disappointment. I assumed that he had finally figured it out and paid the lights no mind. What I hadn't known was my dad had given up weeks ago and put in an average light switch. The next morning I go down and see the lights are still on. I assume the timer didn't turn them off, so I go to shut them off, and discover to my shock it's a switch. This causes me to panic a bit because that meant someone had been out there and the rest of my family was asleep last night, and quite likely they could have been watching me. By the way, I have an extreme fear of being watched. A few weeks later I'm sitting downstairs on the couch. I'm home alone, it's the dead of night, and my dog, who is very relaxed with frequent events but has a habit of being too chill sometimes. Suddenly she perks up and looks out the window. Out of habit I look with her and see something hunched and white dropping down over our fence and running past the windows. Thanks to the dirty windows and the glare of the lights, I couldn't even hope to make out what I saw or how big it was, but I yelped, panicked, and called my buddies. They were skeptical and told me it was probably a raccoon, and I ended up agreeing. I went outside my dogs, my older chocolate lab, and my German puggle, German Shepherd Pug Beagle mix, the one who had been with me. I went out trying to see what it was right away. My dogs had two very different reactions. The lab was pacing and sniffing and looking around and being very anxious. The other was wagging her tail and looking at the trees the way she does when I have treats. Suddenly from said trees I hear a loud groan. These are big, strong, old trees, and they don't groan, not unless something is on them. And the mountain lion who went up them a year ago proved that. Midwest United States, BTW, now I tried shining a light up there but saw nothing, but the trees are thick, and it wasn't until that mountain lion growled last time that I saw him up there in broad daylight. FYI, it is weird seeing mountain lions here. When authorities came through, they ended up determining it was sick and malnourished, so they weren't shocked it wandered into the area. I ended up going inside because my puggle was moving between the trees with the same look. My lab seemed to be getting increasingly anxious but now was staying away from the trees and just watching them, my puggle and me, and I wasn't seeing anything, but all night I heard weird things. The worst was a loud slam like a tree branch had fallen, but there was nothing there, and my puggle kept going to windows and acting unhappy about being kept in. But the rest was like the sound of something on the roof, pebbles being thrown at the window, and the return of a woodpecker who should have been dead after my cats got the poor thing with a vengeance. I don't know where they were in all this. Now this was the climax that drove me here. It's been a couple of months now, and I have mostly forgotten about it. Occasionally I'll hear something weird on the front porch or footsteps, or the porch lights will get turned on mysteriously. But they're small things. Tonight I was with my sister and FaceTiming with a friend in the basement again when we heard a screeching sound. Now my first concern was my 2 of 3 cat siblings, who had taken over the area, which meant they liked to fight the raccoons, dumb cats. Now the sound didn't sound like any raccoon I'd ever heard, but they make odd sounds, especially when 2 data are attacking it. So I run to the window in the next room, where I believe I'll be able to see them, and then go out to break the fight up from a safe distance, but I instead let out a scream and a flurry of curse words. Outside, standing taller than me for sure, I'm 6 feet, so pretty tall, was a gaunt white humanoid figure with its back turned to the window. When I got back to the window and looked back out, it was nowhere to be seen. I at first thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. There was snow on the ground, and I was dying for a rational explanation because it scared me badly. I was shaking. I told my sister, and she laughed at me. I went upstairs later that night and got everything ready for the night and locked up. When I went back up front, I froze. I could see my cat, who seemed agitated but calm for the most part, on the garage roof looking at something on my porch. That something was the same white figure, back turned again, except this time it was squatted down and looking at my cat. It didn't seem confrontational itself. But then, for God's sake, this sent me into tears. It turned its whole body and twisted, and it seemed to kind of straighten as it did. I can only think of a meerkat as an example, but it was so sudden I was sure I heard bones crack through the window. I never saw the face. As soon as it turned, flight kicked in and ran into my room as fast as I could. The last thing I saw of it as I slammed my door was it on the railing as it leapt towards what I assume was the nearby tree. Ever since I've been in my room shaking, crying, and wheezing in a hysterical fit. I like paranormal stuff, but it's a hard no on experiencing it. Now that I calmed down enough to type, I've been thinking about its actions and the previous events. I'm trying to explain this to myself. I at first drew a comparison to the creature, the rake. That didn't help my panic, as you can imagine, but the rake was highly hostile. This thing seemed calm and relaxed most of the time. I don't know what I saw, and it's freaking me out. My partner thought he was going insane until I saw it too, evil and dark. I have experienced shadow figures for a number of years. My partner is a skeptic, was. Within the past 2 weeks, we have both had a number of terrifying experiences, so I will backstory as best I can. The first time it appeared was to my partner and my dog. Paul had taken the dog over the field around 1 a.m. As he entered the field, he saw a figure to his right, but he thought it was a local teen smoking, so he didn't pay it any attention. As he got along the tree line and bent down to get the dog's mess up, he heard trees rustling and looked up. The same figure was in the bushes. It was black and featureless. A prominent figure, but a black and grayish one that looked like it could charge through you. His description: he was terrified, and both he and the dog ran. The thing charged through the undergrowth, keeping level with Paul. Branches were breaking, and it sounded inhuman. The dog dragged Paul, and they ran until they got home. He is skeptical, but he cannot explain it. We went down in the day, and there is no clear path through the undergrowth and no broken trees or branches. A few days later, while walking on the same field with the dog, I heard rustling in the bushes, which suddenly made me feel oppressed and depressed. I turned my gaze towards the rustling, noticed some leaves moving, and attempted to identify whether it was a mouse or something else, but found nothing. But above me in the trees was a shadow creature. I told it to go home. It was lost. I turned and walked away. We both walked the dog the following night and felt evil energy and knew we were being watched. We both knew exactly where we were being watched from and both felt it at the same time. There was nothing visible there. The last incident happened at 4 a.m. this morning. I was walking down the road I live on. A black figure moving fast caught my attention, but I thought it was the local addict, definitely a person. I came level with the alleyway the figure had entered. A black humanoid mass that radiated evil was staring at me from what should have been its face, but it had no features. It was directly under the lamppost, which was working. It felt malevolent. The best description I've heard of it is it's a bull of a thing. The feeling it gives off is worse than seeing it. I'm not usually fazed by shadow people, but this thing is dark and has me worried. If anyone has any insight, I'd greatly appreciate it. Weird occurrence in Spencer, Massachusetts. Okay, I want to clarify that I'm not sure if this was paranormal, extraterrestrial, demonic, or just a weirdo, and to this day, I still don't really know what it was. I've never really had any paranormal experiences before, or after this incident. For context, I live on a farm in Spencer, Massachusetts. Spencer is your stereotypical small New England farm town. Not much going on, the population is just barely over 12,000, and crime is basically non-existent here. Which is part of why this makes me feel like this story must be something more than just some weirdo. My farmhouse is pretty secluded, I'm off any main road and kind of out there. This happened, I want to say, 2023-ish, and it freaked me the hell out. I was in my room, scrolling on my phone as one does before going to bed. I was around 10 or 11 at night. My bed has a window right next to it, and outside the window there's a single oak tree about 5 or 6 feet away. There's a street light at night that is behind the tree and illuminates it from behind, so all I can really see is the silhouette of the tree. Well, as I was scrolling on my phone, I suddenly got a weird feeling I was being watched. The feeling didn't go away, and to calm my mind, I just kept scrolling. But then in my peripheral vision, I could see the outline of a humanoid shape peering behind the tree directly at me. When I noticed it, internally I was freaking out, but I didn't want to alert it, I guess, so I just kept scrolling. Finally, I just decided to turn my phone off and pretend to go to sleep. But as soon as I made eye contact with the figure, it ran. Ran faster than a human body should allow. It looked like sped up footage, if that makes sense. Like, I was taken aback, and it freaked me the hell out. It definitely looked like the silhouette of a humanoid. Was roughly a normal height, so like 5 feet 10 inches minus 6 feet maybe? After a minute of shock and pure adrenaline, I get out of my bed, wake up my grandfather, and tell him there must be someone running into the field behind our house. That was the only logical explanation I could give. We have cows and horses back there, so maybe this person was trying to do something? But deep down I knew there was no way in hell that thing was a human. We turned on the back porch lights, and nothing. Absolutely nothing. To this day I still don't know what it was. It was brief, it was weird. So yeah, that's pretty much it. White gliding humanoid. I, my mom, and my sister were outside late one night in 2019 watching the stars. We live in the middle of nowhere. We were talking when suddenly I spotted something white out of the corner of my eye moving down the road. We live in an old farmhouse from the late 1800s with a short gravel driveway maybe 10 or 15 car lengths long. What I see is a human-sized thing basically gliding at the speed of a car going at a decent pace. There is a fence on the other side of the street, and it was taller than the fence, so about 7 to 9 feet tall is how tall it was. I look at my sister, and at the same time, she looks at me, and I go, "Did you see it?" She said she did but didn't want to ask first because she didn't know if her eyes were playing tricks on her. At the pace it was going, if it wanted to, it could have been up our driveway in seconds and right beside us. My mom has terrible eyesight, so she didn't see it, but it freaked me and my sister out enough that we went in. Does anyone know what this could have been? The uncomfortable observers. For background context, it is a running observation amongst my peers that everywhere in our hometown, if not the entire state of Hawaii, is haunted, mainly differing in the degree of activity. My childhood home is no exception, with some semi-permanent residents who are normally neutral if not benign, like a lady in white who simply strolls around the neighborhood and sometimes our stairs, or a figure whom my family assumes is a veteran friend who likes to smoke cigarettes on the retaining wall. This story is in regard to an entity, or couple of entities, who have been there since my father's childhood. It is difficult to gauge their intent, as while their activities are not actively harmful, they are definitely uncomfortable. According to my father, Before our current house was built, the old home's living room used to contain a billiard/pool table for the family. The balls had occasionally moved on their own, and the reason was later confirmed by my father and his friends when one night an unknown figure rose from the table and suddenly disappeared through the garage door. Later on, when the old house was torn down and the current house was built, the same location on the lot became a utility room and adjoining gym/storage room. To this day, whenever someone young or otherwise sensitive is in or near those rooms, an uncomfortable sensation of being watched will come over us. The garage generally stayed in the same spot, so occasionally a figure may be seen when the lights are low and few others are around. The location makes it hard to determine if they are the same entity that inhabits the rooms from behind the garage, though they have a similar trait of an uncomfortable gaze. The worst of their behavior comes the rare times they appear suddenly beside or behind you at night. A featureless humanoid figure with no face that watched you take out the trash or, in my mother's case, have a cigarette alone, who suddenly forms for a few moments before disappearing just as quickly into the shadows. While not expressly hostile, and hopefully never will, their actions are generally unwelcome and uncomfortable. The veteran may occasionally leave his post on the other side of the yard to run them off, usually standing guard near the garage as we sometimes see the subtle flicker of his cigarette. Nonetheless, the figures will eventually return, much to me and my siblings' discomfort. Jins under the fig tree. Hello. My name is Shinan. I am a journalist living in Turkey. Paranormal investigations are my hobby. I did not experience this story. It happened to one of my readers, who sent it to me to publish. I live in a village in Zonguldak. My name is Dilaver. In Turkey, people use this male name. When I was a kid, the women in my village usually gathered in a house at night and told horror stories about jins. Thus, they unnecessarily scare themselves. Since I was a kid, I used to go to these meetings with my mother, listen to the stories, and be influenced by them. Our village is an old mountain village, which is neglected and secluded. The entire village is on a slope. There is no single flat road. There is no lighting in the streets either. But there is a mill at the entrance of the village. My mother and her friends used to go to the mill in the morning and make cornmeal until the evening. There were cherry, laurel, and fig trees around the mill. One day, I went to the mill with my mother. The day had not dawned yet, and it could be considered night. We put sacks of corn in the mill to grind and make flour. I had to pee, and the mill did not have any toilet. I had to pee under a fig tree. After urinating, I returned to the mill. While I was working in the mill, my mother told me, "I will go to the house and come back soon. Do not go anywhere." I don't know if it's psychological, but once I was alone, I started to hear someone calling me by saying, "Hey! Hey!" I panicked when the door of the mill suddenly opened. I got out of the mill to check whether there was someone outside. Once I got out, I think I saw someone under the fig tree. The light of the mill was not lighting that area much. Maybe this is because I believe the shade I saw was looking at me. Suddenly I thought, I hope that is not a jinn. I shuddered with this thought. I went back into the mill and closed the door. However, it opened again. I panicked when the door suddenly and harshly opened again. I didn't know what to do. Instinctively I wanted to get out and run as fast as I could. When I got out to do this, I saw dozens of shades around the mill and in front of me. I went back in, entered the mill, and sat down. I started to say prayers I remember while crying. I lost myself with fear. During this time, my mother arrived and took me home. I bruised the arms of my mother with my nails. However, I didn't even realize it. When I returned to normal at home, my mother, father, and other members of my family asked me what happened and why I was so scared. I couldn't tell what I saw to anyone. Just because I may feel the same fear again while telling it. In the following days, I wanted to forget the shades I had seen, but my nightmares didn't allow me to do so. In my nightmares, someone was constantly trying to strangle me. These dreams were so real that I usually woke up out of breath. I had these nightmares every night when I went to bed without ablution. My family, who noticed that I was losing my mind, took me to the imam of the village mosque. They told him about me. However, the imam didn't see any problems in me. He told me that I'm okay, and the problems I suffer could be psychological. However, I was not crazy. My family thought, mosque imams might not understand such things, and they took me to another Hoja. This Hoja was experienced in jinn haunting and reversing spells. This Hoja put a bowl of water in front of me when we went to meet him, and he said, "Now look at this water carefully. If you see anything in the water, tell me what you see." I swear, I saw the ones who strangled me. I told what I saw too, Hoja. I answered the questions of Hoja. In the end, the Hoja gave me a vefk, too. He said, You have to carry this vefk on you. Jins cannot approach you as long as you carry this, and they cannot harm you. However, if you take it off or lose it, they will haunt you, and they can even kill you. I have been wearing that vefk necklace for years. After that day, I had no problems with jins. However, the problem is I lost that vefk a few days ago. I don't know what to do. When I was 7 years old, growing up on the outskirts of Oaxaca, Mexico, something happened to me that I still can't fully explain. My parents owned a small restaurant, and we lived in a modest back room where we all slept together in one bed, my parents, my sister, and me. One night, I woke up needing to use the restroom. As I groggily rubbed my eyes, something caught my attention in the corner of the room. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, so I blinked hard, trying to clear the crust from my eyes. But when I looked again, I saw it clearly, a figure, crouched and staring at me from the shadows. Panic surged through me. I wanted to run back to the safety of the bed, but I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. The figure, which looked almost human, began to rise and walk toward me. Each step it took sent a wave of terror through my body, but still, I couldn't move. As it drew closer, I finally managed to break free from my fear. I lunged onto the bed, frantically trying to wake my family, but they wouldn't budge. It was as if they were in a deep, unnatural sleep. Desperate, I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping it would all go away. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself sitting on the edge of the bed. My mother was awake, standing next to me, staring at the humanoid figure. They didn't speak, just looked at each other in silence. Gathering all my courage, I got up and walked around the thing. I reached out and pushed it. It felt slick, almost slimy, like its skin or clothes were coated in something, but it wasn't wet or anything. Its skin was a sickly gray, but no matter how hard I tried, I could never remember its face. After I pushed it, my mother finally spoke. She simply said, "He won't bother you again." And just like that, the figure was gone. To this day I remember everything I asked my mom about that night, and she said, "I don't know what you're talking about. So tell me, was it an alien or just a ghost?" Astounding, true humanoid encounters. One of the most astounding experiences a person can have is a direct face-to-face encounter with an extraterrestrial humanoid from another world. And yet, it happens far more often than people think. Cases like these have been reported for well over 100 years and likely into prehistory. Cases come from across the planet. This video presents 10 lesser-known cases, each one contributing to our knowledge of ET contact. These accounts can no longer be explained away as hoaxes, hallucinations, or misperceptions. The evidence speaks for itself. We are being visited by extraterrestrials. 1. IT wasn't anything human. Late in the evening of October 23, 1963, Robert W. Smith drove alone through a rural area of South River, New Jersey. Suddenly he observed something very unusual in the beams of his car headlights: 3 tiny humanoid figures wearing tight-fitting, silver, one-piece jumpsuits. The figures scampered across the road far faster than any living creature Robert had seen before. Robert was too scared to stop his car. It was an experience he would remember for the rest of his life, and he later regretted not stopping to investigate. 2. The floating humanoid of Cofico. On July 2, 1968, many residents of the small town of Cofico, Argentina, observed strange craft in the sky. Some saw weird, floating humanoid creatures. 3 witnesses at one residence observed a luminous humanoid figure levitating in the air. Another witness described a 9-foot-tall, robotic-looking creature, also levitating in the sky. It wasn't long before someone else in a different residence encountered the same thing. Even policemen in the area also saw UFOs. 3. The jaywalking aliens. In early May of 1969, several people in the small town of Rockville, Virginia, began to see strange craft in the skies above their homes. But on the night of May 11, 1969, Mike Lukskiewicz observed something much stranger: actual humanoid creatures. While driving along Route 622, he observed what he initially assumed were 2 deer. Then he quickly realized they were something else entirely: 2 4-foot-tall humanoids with giant heads. They crossed the road in front of him. Seconds later, a third one zipped across the road, leaving no doubt that they were not humans. 4. IT didn't seem like a normal person. On the evening of January 21, 1977, Juan Pedro Hernandez, while driving near Camuy, Puerto Rico, was awestruck to observe an apparent extraterrestrial craft hovering at treetop level overhead. Inside, he was amazed to see a skinny figure with a big head and dark eyes looking at him from a transparent cupola. Suddenly a beam of light came out from the UFO and struck him, generating an intense feeling of peace and calm. The beam of light disappeared, and the strange craft began to move away. One followed, but a black van filled with men in dark suits blocked his way. When he tried to get by them, they came out and began to threaten him. Then 2 more crafts appeared. 5. The UFO gnome. In late March of 1978, Constantina Imbibos and her husband started to see numerous strange craft behind their home in rural Villamere di Sopri, Italy. Then on April 25, 1978, after several encounters, Constantina saw another weird craft, and moments later, an odd gnome-like humanoid in an orange suit and pointed hat appeared. It playfully hopped around like a gnome and disappeared. But soon more strange craft would be seen, and other witnesses also saw gnomish-looking creatures. 6. An 8-foot-tall gray. On the evening of July 31, 2018, a military veteran with a top-secret clearance drove along State Route 13 just north of Mount Vernon, Ohio, when an 8-foot-tall, super skinny, hairless humanoid traversed in front of him. It had black eyes, a little mouth, and only 4 fingers on each hand. The witness knew instantly that it was not human. Truly frightened, the witness decided it was a good idea to keep driving. 7. I saw something I will never forget. Around 5 a.m. on the morning July 16, 2020, Paul Froggatt was bicycling home from his job at a dog food factory in Warwick, UK when a glowing craft appeared. Intrigued, he stopped and captured 2 photographs with his camera. As he continued home, he saw that the craft was following him. Shortly later, while taking a shortcut through a forested path, he came face to face with a 7-foot-tall, greenish-colored praying mantis humanoid. He was so frightened, he began to weep with fear. He fled the area, thoroughly traumatized. Then the nightmares began of being taken on board a craft. As hard as it might be for some people to accept, the huge amount of cases involving humanoid encounters make it inescapable that we are being visited by extraterrestrials. Thankfully, as the government UFO cover-up collapses under the weight of its own lies, and as a growing number of witnesses reveal their encounters, the truth is coming out. Extraterrestrials are real. And it is now long past time that all of humanity knows it. My childhood encounter with Grey. Let me preface this by saying, yes, this happened when I was 7 years old. I know that memory can be tricky, but I have also thought about this experience every day since it happened. It's less important to me if this experience was real or not, and more important to me that whatever it was, it had a significant, long-lasting impact on my life. And the crazy thing is, it lasted just a few seconds. It was the night before or early morning of January 25, 1999. Central California. And I only know the exact date because it was the only time it snowed here, in a really long time anyway, so you can still Google the newspaper articles about it. Anyway, basically, I woke up, sat up straight in bed. And crouching on the bed, one knee bent on the bed, one leg off the bed, was a typical gray alien. The alien, with its large head and large black eyes, was quite striking. To me, the skin looked greenish-gray and had an almost rubbery or just very smooth texture. No nose, slit for a mouth, no visible ears. Remember it not wearing any clothing. It just stared at me, and I just remember feeling shocked, like not enough time to even feel terrified. That came the days, weeks, months after. For whatever reason I just laid back down, turned on my side, put the covers over my head, and I guess I fell asleep. The whole next day I was thankfully partially distracted by a rare snow day, but I also was very aware that I would not be able to go to sleep without feeling petrified for a long time. I thought about telling my parents, but I didn't have a word for what I had seen. No reference for it. Didn't know it was an alien or a gray. For lack of a better word, it was totally alien and unknown to me. It wasn't until I was at a friend's house whose dad was watching a sci-fi movie that had typical grays in it that I learned to associate what I had seen with the word alien, and that they were at least real enough to be depicted on TV. And then, of course, I noticed them everywhere, in shows, movies, art, etc. I accept that this could have been a hallucination or very vivid nightmare or whatever, maybe I had seen them depicted on TV before, and my subconscious picked up on it. But it is the single event that led to a lifelong obsession with aliens and unexplained phenomena. Sometimes I wonder if that was the whole point of that experience in the first place, or if that's a part of the reason why they appear to people, just so stories about them will continue to influence our culture, mythos, spirituality, etc. Anyway, thanks for listening. Encounter with a static humanoid being? I'm almost 23 years old, and sometimes I'm left thinking about the great wonders of many possibilities out there. So let me be acknowledged by this. Secondly, I am skeptical about it myself, as it was a decade ago that the encounter with this being I witnessed occurred. The significance lies in sharing my experience, as it's possible that someone else has noticed similarities in the details of the subsequent story. I was about 10 or 11 years old, walking home in a northern, isolated town in rural Canada, just coming from the store when it was closing, about 11 p.m. I saw a floating ball that was completely white, very small, about like a basketball in size. The ball was floating in about the height of torso high. Just a picture height scale, and this white ball of light burst like a light bulb, and out of nowhere appeared a figure that was in the details of a human being. Arms, legs, torso, and body. Everything was there, but this figure's only details were TV static. This figure just walked for a few steps, and once it hit a part of the sidewalk, it vanished. I saw the white ball appear out of thin air and burst again, and the TV static man vanished. I typically don't share unusual stories with friends, but I thought it would be intriguing to share this story online during my night shift as a way to pass the time when I'm bored. Thanks for hearing my story, and let me know what you have to think/say. Experience as a kid, I saw weird humanoid figures. This whole thing is going to sound really strange, but it's been bugging me for a while, and I was wondering if anyone else has experienced this. It's going to be a long one. When I was young, like, really young, probably around 6 or 7. I used to sleep with the curtains open so I could see our front yard, and I used to see these figures walking around outside at night. After I told my parents about this, they assured me that it was just the shadows of neighborhood cats. I don't think I fell for it, but as anyone would do, I started to sleep with the curtains shut. After this, I would wake up late at night, and this humanoid figure would be walking up and down beside my bed. Sometimes they'd just stand and watch me. I was never extremely scared, albeit weirded out, so I'd juke for a few seconds, then turn around to face the wall with my eyes shut, and when I turned back around after a couple of minutes, the figure would be gone. Once the figure stopped and leaned on my bed to scratch its foot. I have no idea why I remember this, but I find it kind of funny. I saw the figure as a female, a purplish color with green and blue and wearing a headdress similar to the ones the pharaohs wore. I don't think I felt threatened at first, but after time it began to creep me out. My parents' room was just across the hallway, and I'd always look up the hall to make sure nothing was watching. This one time I remember relatively vividly was a night where I was caught a couple of meters away from my parents' door, and this figure, random, but I remember it was a brownish color, was in front of me. It kind of resembled a scarecrow, and it was dancing in front of me. When I try to recall it, I can remember a thinner figure standing beside it. This figure terrified me more than the one near my bed did. I still have the habit of looking up and down the hall whenever I leave my room at night, even though I'm at a different house. I never see anything, though. I also have this faint memory of seeing a small ghost-like figure, kinda looked like Casper, if you know what I mean, floating by the light on my little brother's air conditioner. It gets a bit weirder after this. I'm not an extremely religious person, but this coincidence is pretty uncanny. My mother has this sand painting from some lady who claimed to be able to see people's spirit guides. It looks pretty much exactly like I remember the figure who would stand near my bed. They had the headdress and the colors on par. The painting was from years before I was born. I still get an uneasy feeling when I remember that figure by my bed because I just can't find an explanation as to what I saw. I'm pretty sure it wasn't just me making it up because I remember too many of these occasions for it to be made up, and it wasn't sleep paralysis because I could move. I can live with it if I never get the answer, but it keeps coming back up in my mind, and I can't help but wonder. Pale white humanoid. I really need some answers about what I saw behind our house a year or two ago. I am in the Philippines, and there's not a lot of similar stories or sightings of a pale white humanoid in our country. It was evening at my mom's house around 9 or 10 p.m. I was about to cook something in our dirty kitchen. The kitchen is located at the backmost part of our house. It's at the very corner of our lot in between two rooms, the neighbor's property, and a half wall opening to an open lot. The wall is about 5 feet with metal bars and chicken wire on top of it to prevent snakes and rodents from going inside our home. I opened the lights and was greeted by this white bald humanoid. I'll call it a humanoid because, hell, it doesn't look human. It had bloody red veins on its head and long fingers, or nails, I'm not so sure, that are as long as its head. It's poking out behind the upper left corner of the half wall. I just froze there trying to make out what it is. I think it's a good 5 seconds. Its hands moved in a fanning motion. A good example is when an oriental folding fan opens and then closes. In that motion, its hands were in front of its face doing this, simultaneously going down the half wall and disappearing from view. When it was gone, boy, did I storm out of that kitchen. Now, this year, January 2025, we were there for the holidays. We were about to leave the house when it happened. My wife said she has seen a pale white arm from the room adjacent to the dirty kitchen. As she described, the hand did the same fan-like motion and vanished from the room. My wife said the arm had a shadow. The arm poked out of the door. When the arm disappeared, she got closer to look and found that the door to the room was closed. I didn't tell the first story to my mother, but when my wife saw the thing and that it seemed it's already inside the house, we asked her to burn incense in that part of the house. The gray clay man my cousin and I saw one night. Humanoid. One night, in 2013, I went over to my cousin's house when I was probably about 13-14. This was in California. We were the same age, and she had just moved in with her step-siblings and stepdad with her mom. They were in a transition moving period, and her room was basically in the living room, the only thing separating it was a curtain. It was weird, but not permanent. Lowell, me, her, Sav, and our other cousin, Trinity, were all at the kitchen table talking about random stories. The living room and kitchen were all open. Sav's room was about 10 feet away from where we were. My cousin Sav at that time period was going through it really bad mentally. She kept having really bad sleep paralysis of these gray-looking people with greasy black hair, hugging her in her sleep and staring at her. I kept getting the feeling she had something attached to her. I have always been really spiritual, along with most of the women in my family. When I would bring it up to her, she'd get mad at me and tell me to drop it, so I did. But anyways, back to this night. It was probably about 7 p.m. We had just eaten some pizza. I and Trinity were talking about whatever, and all of a sudden all the lights in the house shut off for probably 1 second and went back on. We screamed in unison. No clue why, but I felt extremely compelled to look over to where my cousin's room/curtain was. And I saw this 5 feet 10 inches figure. Keep in mind, it's dark out but not pitch black, and we had all the lights on where we were. We could see clear as day. I just remember the dead silence. I see this man, and he seems to have old 1800s/1900s brownish attire. He had a top hat on, but his skin was just gray. It looked like someone made a clay figure with real clay. It had human features, but I couldn't make out what I was looking at. I just had a pit in my stomach. Like this thing wanted me to know it did not want me there. I was in awe, staring at it for probably 5/10 seconds in silence. All it did was stand there. But all I could feel was disgust, anger, and fear, basically, any negative human emotion. It washed over me. After I snapped back to look at my cousins, they were both pale and in shock too. I asked them if they saw what I just did, and they did. To this day they still ducking remember it, so I know I'm not crazy. We all described the same thing, and I wanted to get the F out of there. I damn near started crying because I felt so uncomfortable and weirded out and called my mom to pick me up, but she would be about an hour or two to get me as she was with friends, and we ended up watching movies, and I fell asleep. I just remember right before how scared I was I'd see it again. I never did. Years later, I met my boyfriend, whose parents described seeing a clay-textured skin/humanoid. All gray skin. And it was the same icky feeling. Has anyone else experienced seeing something like this? This was my most vivid paranormal experience and seriously shook me, and when I think about it, I still cannot believe we all saw the same thing lol. Hand to God, this happened. WTF was it? I saw it. My cousin had sleep paralysis dreams with the same gray-skinned people. The faces were molded like clay, but they weren't quite perfect. My BF's family saw it. So strange. Blue, misty, humanoid-looking things? What I'm about to tell you is, without a doubt, 100% true. The fact that the kids that lived in that house after me saw them too should be more than enough to take this seriously. It's difficult for me to talk about this because, well, I don't know anything about what I saw, and a lot of times it's hard for me to put into words, but I'm going to do the best I can here tonight, so bear with me. I was around 4 years old, and the encounters occurred in 1996 or possibly the first half of 1997 when I lived in that house. The memories and sequence of events were a blur, but I remember what these things looked like clear as day. Anyway, here's a description. They had blue skin and big, white eyes, only there were no pupils or anything. They were just white and bright, but I could tell when they were looking at me. They had no nose, no ears, and no mouth. Some were short, and some were tall. They were thin and agile. Their fingers were creepy, kind of similar to the demon from Insidious. Okay, duck it, go ahead and laugh. They were more like Grinch fingers, only nowhere near as long and obviously not green. Add a blue, transparent, misty aura to finish. At first I would only see maybe one at a time, and the sightings weren't as constant, but it frightened me, and I was scared at night. Then, gradually, more would show themselves around the house during the dark. I remember one night, I woke up and I didn't even bother to look behind me. I bolted out of my room and ran to the steps of the living room. It was the type of living room where like 2 of 3 steps led down into it. I forgot what those are called. Anyway, I'd quote it as with spirits, but if they want you to look at them, they have a way of making you look as if it's some magnetic pull. I'd counter describe it. I looked back and saw like 10 or 15 of them of various heights in my room jumping every which way, hitting every corner seemingly not touching each other and in perfect sync. Then a few stopped jumping, and one was crouched on the ground and pointing at me while others pointed at me from their places, whether on the ceiling or from a corner. All I remember next was waking up on the steps and my oldest sister asking what in the world I'm doing there. I guess that night did it for me because after that I flat out refused to go into my room even in the daytime. When it was bedtime and my parents would try to take me in there, I screamed bloody murder. I remember screaming and crying and begging. My parents gave in and let me sleep in their bed. Things seemed fine for a while, and I was much happier, but I still avoided my room like the plague. Well, one night, I was asleep next to my mom on my mom's side of the bed, and I randomly woke up. There was that goddamn magnetic pull again. I looked up and saw a short one standing over me. I was scared and didn't know what to do. We maintained eye contact for a few minutes, and then suddenly, it tilted its head to the side as it looked at me. Well, that one little movement once again set me off, and the last thing I remember is crawling over to my dad and a bloody murder scream. After that, I don't recall anything, as if I've blocked it out. That's the last encounter I remember with these things. We ended up moving into a different house that was also haunted, however, that is another story. Don't worry, the ghost in the new house wasn't malicious, but I will share that some other time. I don't remember why, but I guess my mom had to get something from the new people in that house. She brought me along, and the kids, a boy and a girl, talked to me. The girl showed me her pet cat, and it was white and named Snowball, I think? I got to pet her. She made sure I know she is a she. I don't remember how the conversation came up, but I remember the girl and the boy both telling me they saw them. They both looked genuinely terrified, but I never saw them again when my mom and I left. Sometimes I wonder how they are doing and hope they are okay. That pretty much wraps up the childhood portion, although recently I was door dashing after work. Yes, I have a day job, and I door dash. I like money, shrug. I ended up delivering to that street on the exact side of the street that house is on and got that eerie feeling. I delivered right next to that house, which inspired me to write this, even though it took me a month to get there. Anyway, that is it. If anyone can tell me what these things possibly were, I would greatly appreciate it because I still have no idea to this day, and sometimes it does bug me. Also, if anyone has any additional questions, I will do my best to answer them. After leaving this house, I developed severe insomnia that required me to take clonidine for sleep. To this day, I still require medication for sleep, but now I take trazodone. This has deeply affected me, despite my belief that I have moved on. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this. A mysterious humanoid figure? Okay, so the story I'm about to tell is 100% real. So basically this took place 3 years ago in my old house. At this point in time, I was 13 years old and completely unconvinced about paranormal entities being real. For a little background, this story starts back just after we had moved into our new house. We moved to a new city after my dad received a great job offer. It was late in the evening, and both my parents weren't at the house. My mom was meeting with some friends, and my dad was on the evening shift at work, which meant I was home alone. It was probably just around 7 o'clock when my mom left the house, leaving me alone. I didn't really mind, though, because I was looking forward to having the house to myself and just having the chance to hang out and watch TV on the big screen in our living room. For a little insight, the living room is on the main floor of my house. I have both a basement and an upstairs. I was just hanging out and watching some Netflix show on the TV. I want to say maybe around 7:30-ish, possibly a little later. I was just lying out on my couch half asleep as you do. For some reason, due to me being half asleep, I heard a creak from upstairs, one you would hear when someone's walking on hardwood flooring. Normally, I wouldn't find this odd since I have a dog and a cat, but this house was built the year before we bought it. Everything was super sturdy and fresh, so the floors didn't creak at all. But alas, I just brushed it off like it was my dog or something. This was probably at least half an hour later when I heard this weird click noise. I don't exactly know how to explain it. It was like the sound when you lock a door but just louder. I couldn't even pinpoint where I had heard it from. It sounded like it came from upstairs and downstairs. At this point, I got really paranoid, not because I thought there was a ghost but because this was a new house and I didn't know it well at all, so I decided to help calm my nerves. I would get on a FaceTime call with my friend. Nothing at all happened after I was on a call with them, which definitely made me feel better. I wasn't expecting both my parents to be home earlier than at least 12 o'clock, and at this point, it was probably 10:00-ish. I was tired, so I just decided to go upstairs and get ready for bed. I took a quick shower and did all the normal stuff you do to get ready, brushing teeth, washing your face, etc. It only took me like 15 minutes, so I want to say it was only around 10:15. You're probably wondering why I keep bringing up the time. You will figure it out later on in this story. At this point, I was in bed with only my window light. I don't quite know how long I had been asleep, but I knew my parents were not home due to what happened later. When I woke up very suddenly, for some reason it felt like how you wake up from a nightmare, you know, like the whole gasp, jolt up head thing. I didn't have a nightmare at all, it was strange. I felt cold, but not the type of physical cold, like the inside cold when you feel your stomach thump. I kind of just sat up and looked around my room, trying to calm myself down. This is crucial so you know it wasn't sleep paralysis or anything of that sort. After taking a quick look around my room, something caught my eye. Looking in the farthest corner of my room, I almost saw a figure. It was terrifying. It was almost human, but it wasn't. It was tall, like, seriously, maybe 8 feet, but it didn't have normal body proportions. It was so skinny, but its arms were long enough to reach its knees. This is going to sound crazy, but the best way to describe it was almost like Slender Man but shorter. I was so persistent that it wasn't paranormal, and maybe it was just something my clothes had made up. I don't know why I did what I did, but I lay down and tried to go back to sleep despite my dripping feeling of dread. But I couldn't sleep at all. I lay there forever. I didn't feel safe, but I just lay there. I don't know how long had passed, but I heard my dad's car pull into the driveway, making me feel safer. Curiosity was killing me, so I pulled my head from under my covers to peek and see if it was still there, and it wasn't. The corner was empty, and I felt better now. Nothing much happened after this. I tried telling my parents, but they told me my mind was playing tricks. I swear to God, though, I saw that thing, and it was real. I thought this would be the best place to share it. Maybe some people will believe me. Thanks for listening. Dark entity every night/day in the hallway. This is an experience I keep having that I wanted to share and possibly get advice on. A few weeks ago, my partner and I moved into a new luxury apartment with our 2 cats. We live in a major city near the beach. The apartment building was recently renovated, but the land has been used for hundreds of years under different tenants. We are on the 6th floor. The only thing I've found in the apartment that belonged to prior tenants was folic acid supplements in the cabinet. Since the very first night we lived here, I've been having a strange experience with an entity. I have had some odd stuff happen before, but nothing quite like this. The first night I was still awake at about 2 in the morning and got up to go to the bathroom. As clearly as day, I heard a deep, male voice say, "There you are." The voice was so human-like and clear that at first I thought our home was under invasion. But then I saw a shadowy entity in the hallway. It was very tall, vaguely humanoid, and dark, sort of like a shadow but static. Why almost? Pixelated. It appeared to be walking on the ground. I retreated back to the bedroom and got in bed. I saw the entity briefly enter the bedroom. Without opening the door, it just went through the wall, and then go back to the hallway. I thought I might have had a waking dream or something. I told my partner about it the next morning, but we both shrugged it off. What's weird is that we were working from home the next day, and I saw it again. It was standing in the hallway, still appearing shadowy, but this time in the full light of day. One of my cats, who was next to me, sat up and looked directly at it, which is what made me turn around to see it. Another cat walked around it the same way it would walk around a human person. Around 2 to 3 a.m. every night, the entity walks the same pathway down the hallway, into the bedroom, and then back through the hallway. During midday, it just sits in the hallway for 15 minutes or so before disappearing again. It doesn't appear every day, but it does appear every night. Sometimes it speaks. It once asked, "Where are you going?" When I turned around to go back to bed. It will otherwise not interact with me. It has never approached me or left the hallway/bedroom entry. My partner can't see it. The cats continue to interact with it, look at it, meow at it, etc. I performed a cleanse with sage and then with holy water my parents gave me, and I've had no luck. It's not a scary entity, per se, but I do find it very unsettling, and I've been struggling to sleep or relax. Let me know if you guys have any thoughts. Bewildered, 10 humanoid encounters. A close-up encounter with humanoids can challenge a person on many levels, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Almost always witnesses are left stunned, surprised, and bewildered. The 10 cases presented in this video come from across the globe and include many kinds of humanoids. They have a wide variety of evidence. And each account illustrates how the witnesses are deeply and profoundly affected in a way that leaves them with a whole new worldview. 1. Black hole aliens. On August 26, 1974, Jean-Marie Bigorne stepped outside his home in Feligny, France, and saw a black hole in the grey night sky. As it started to descend, he rushed inside, got his wife, and together they watched it split into two half circles. The right side disappeared, but the left side suddenly revealed two robotic-looking humanoids. The witnesses became entranced and watched it for 45 minutes until going inside. They never saw it leave. 2. Aliens in the Andes. On the night of February 17, 1981, cattleman José Fermín Albornoz was camping out after protecting a herd of sheep in the Manzano Amargo area of the Argentinian Andes. In the middle of the night, he was woken up by a brilliant light and buzzing noise. Opening his eyes, he observed a glowing blue saucer-shaped craft approach and land next to his campsite. As the sheep and horses scattered, two short humanoids appeared and spoke to him in an unknown language. José was so frightened, she lost consciousness. When he woke up, the humanoids were gone, and the UFO was taking off. 3. Humanoids at the campground. One evening in 1981, a group of people were camping at Laguna Sofia National Park in Puerto Natales, Chile. One of the campers stepped outside her tent and saw a strange glowing UFO descend from the sky and land on a small hill just a short distance away. When she walked up to it to get a closer look, a door opened, and three tall humanoids exited and began taking soil samples. She was close enough to see strange gadgets inside the craft. Frightened, she ran back to the campsite and woke everyone up. They all rushed out just in time to watch the craft ascend from the ground and move away. 4. The light-headed alien. On the evening of October 9, 1984, Dorman Isidoro Ferri was woken up in his bedroom at the Villa La Radicchia in Palcanto, Italy, by a blinding light blazing in through the window of his bedroom. Unable to move, he saw that the light was being emitted from the head of a humanoid standing outside. Shortly later, he saw a weird domed craft. The light flashed intermittently, causing his eyes to burn and weakness to overcome his body. Afterwards, landing traces were found, and researchers found many other witnesses. Also, Isidoro's dog was left badly traumatized. 5. The aliens at school. One day in June 1986, Leif returned to his van, which was parked next to a school in Aturøya, Norway. Suddenly he saw a 3-foot-tall figure walking towards him. It had a bald head and huge dark eyes and wore a shiny blue jumpsuit. A short distance behind it was a landed dome-shaped craft. Shocked and afraid, Leif hid behind the truck. To his relief, the little man turned around and re-entered the craft. Looking up, he saw two of the figures sitting side by side in the craft. They both simultaneously turned their heads and stared at Leif as their craft ascended upwards and departed. 6. The hunters and the aliens. On the evening of June 26, 1987, 3 men were hunting in the countryside near Badajoz, Spain. Suddenly a massive star-like object appeared in the sky. It zoomed towards them and hovered above the ground, disgorging 2 very tall, strong-looking figures. The 2 humanoids approached the hunters, loping in a weird slow-motion manner towards them. Afraid, the witnesses fled the scene. As they hid in the bushes, they observed the craft depart. Later, it was discovered that the leaves of the trees where the craft had hovered were dried and withered. 7. KT and the Greys. One day in May 1992, wildlife researcher KT Frankovich was walking her dogs through a lime grove next to her apartment in Miami-Dade, Florida, something she had done many times. Suddenly she saw a small being standing a short distance away looking at her. Never having thought about aliens, she didn't realize that it was a gray alien. KT watched it for a few moments, receiving several telepathic messages. When she sensed more aliens around her, she ran away in fear. A few nights later, 2 greys appeared outside her apartment, a female and what appeared to be a younger adolescent gray. They had another message to share. It was a profoundly benevolent experience that would change the direction of KT's life. 8. Havana humanoid. On the morning of November 27, 1995, in Havana City, Cuba, security guard Samuel Rodolfo Barreras was shocked to see a strange light flying low in the sky. Thinking a plane was about to crash, he was shocked to see it was a flying saucer. Seconds later, it landed next to the buildings he was guarding. An opening appeared in the craft, and a robotic-looking humanoid stepped out. Samuel was unable to move as a humanoid. It stopped, then moved its head back and forth and scanned the area for a full 15 minutes before suddenly returning to the craft, which promptly departed. 9. The humanoid in the bathroom. Late on the night of June 24, 2001, Mr. GH, a university professor from Patras, Greece, had finished watching TV and walked into his kitchen to turn out the light. As he did, he felt a wave of cool air sweep over him. Turning around, he was shocked to see a tall, faceless humanoid wearing a shiny blue coverall standing only 6 feet away. Before Mr. GH could react, the figure ran into his bathroom and disappeared. For the next few minutes, he chased it around the house from room to room, moving like a dancer on its toes. Finally, he chased it back into the bathroom twice more until suddenly it was gone, leaving the witnesses utterly bewildered. 10. IT appeared 3 times. One evening in December 2001, a young man was watching television alone in the living room of his family's home in Tampa, Florida. Hearing an odd crinkling noise outside, he looked and saw a gray ET standing in his backyard. It quickly ran off and disappeared. But shortly later, the witness heard the same sound again, like a crunching chip bag, and saw that the apparent extraterrestrial had returned to his backyard. He sent his dogs out, but they did not sense anything. Then the gray-skinned humanoid returned a 3rd time. Each time, the witness was not believed. These 10 cases show how truly bizarre a UFO/humanoid encounter can be and how deeply it changes a person. Only a first-hand witness can ever know how it actually feels to have an encounter with a humanoid from a UFO. Horrifying encounter with entity in Russia. Me and 4 of my friends were in the Russian countryside this winter. We stayed at one of my friends' houses from mid-December to the beginning of January, about 20 kilometers east of Moscow. On the night before New Year's, we had a terrifying encounter with something horrible. It was 1:30 a.m., and we had stayed at the house all day, eaten pizza, watched movies, and played Mortal Kombat. We had also been to the sauna and had all been in good spirits, as later that day it would be New Year's. We were outside my friend's house, which overlooks a tiny valley about 10 meters in depth and 60 meters in length, and we were blowing up some firecrackers that we had prepared. His house is quite isolated with the nearest neighbors about 100 meters away. We blew them up one by throwing them into the valley that was next to the house. As we were doing this, I was the first to notice a black silhouette with a glowing cigarette in the distance moving towards us extremely fast. I immediately notified everyone with me and told them to get inside the house's courtyard. My friends saw the figure, were confused as to who it may be and what they were doing, but weren't worried, as the figure was a very long way away, and we had at least 2 minutes before he came close enough to properly see our faces or do anything. I looked back at the figure and immediately noticed that his eyes had a faint glow, nothing crazy or bright, just a very faint, yellow/goldish glow, similar to the way a cat's eyes reflect light in the darkness. I also noticed that the figure had traveled a considerable distance in the 5 seconds I took to turn around and inform my friends. This was especially worrying as he was walking, not running. I immediately knew that it was time to leave. I ran towards the gate to the house and yelled for my friends to follow me, which, after witnessing what I had witnessed, they obliged, except one of them. One of our friends looked frozen in fear. His eyes were wide open, his mouth slightly open too, and he was not blinking. This entire time he was looking at the figure. I ran and pushed him in order to get him to move, which made him snap out of some sort of light trance, as he was slightly lost. By this point the figure was about 100 meters away, and nearly at the same time, all of us were filled by a visceral feeling of dread, not fear, but more like, whatever is happening right now is very, very wrong. We later realized that this probably emanated from the man. As we were entering the garden and ducking behind the fence, we noticed that the man was moving a minimum of 5 times as fast as a regular person running, while making absolutely no noise, even though he was walking. We hid behind the fence for ages and managed to get a picture of him from underneath the fence. He then walked into the nearby woods, leaving behind absolutely no footprints and making no noise at all. I have no clue what this was, but we are 100% sure that whatever this was not human. My experiences with various dark figures. I'm 20 years old, I have no known mental disorders aside from depression, and I had never had any experiences with the paranormal until moving to a small town in Indiana. I'd lived in the state for the first 16 years of my life, and then I moved to the small town and almost immediately had odd experiences. Thumping in my walls, photos falling off the wall, something scratching along my garage as it walked down the alleyway, things that made me very uncomfortable. It wasn't until roughly a year or a year and a half after I moved there that I started to see things. I saw a tall, black figure that was approximately 11 feet tall, roughly level with the street sign it was standing nearby, and I even saw this thing in my house once. It was standing by a window, and it darted behind a shelf of mine towards the stairs. My room is on the 2nd floor. When I checked the window the next day, I found it unlocked, with a slight crack. This one was smaller, at around 7 feet. I've talked to my brother about it, and we've both seen things that are extremely close in stature to each other, and we've also seen, briefly, things that look much larger than 12 feet. I'm not sure if anyone has experienced similar things, but I wanted to share. Late night bedroom visitor. This happened in the winter of 2015. For context, I had just flown back home to Germany for a winter break from university in America and, naturally, had plenty of jet lag. As was often my problem when flying, I sucked at fixing my jet lag and would often be on the wrong sleep schedule for about a week. Instead of combating this with melatonin, Benadryl, hot milk, or literally any of the other thousands of methods to fall asleep, I decided listening to definitely not calm music would be the best way to lull myself to sleep. You know, like a fool? It was midnight, and as usual, I was completely awake. I lay in the guest bed facing the wall, headphones in and my eyes closed, but otherwise coherent and nowhere close to drifting off. The door to the room was closed but had enough of a gap beneath it that the bright light of the hallway light cast enough light to see where my suitcase was on the floor and so on. While lying there, I felt a hard, bony finger jab my shoulder twice, like someone was trying to get my attention. Like a moron who was evidently way too comfortable in their own home, in the few seconds it took to roll over and face whoever needed me, not once did it occur to me that if one of my family entered the room to shake me awake, the door would not only be open, but the room would be well lit, thanks to the hallway light being on instead of dim. As I turned, I saw a dark, humanoid silhouette standing over me, tall, thin, and disproportionate. The darkness was so deep that it stood out even in a poorly lit room. It loomed over the bed, and it felt like it was staring at me. Naturally, I yelled incoherently because I had no idea who or what it was, just that something had gotten into the room without me knowing, and I had zero idea how much danger I was or was not in. I flung the blankets everywhere. I'm not sure if I was trying to hide or trying to get the figure tangled up instead, but it disappeared in my pinwheeling. I could barely sleep that night, too afraid of what it might do to me if it came back for me, and I was unable to react the next time. Come the morning, I told my family what had happened. My parents apologized and said, "Oh, sorry. Yeah, someone lives in that room, they always have, we're just not sure who. We didn't think they'd bother you, though." I was less than pleased by this revelation but thankfully spent the rest of my winter break with no further visitors in the middle of the night. I would go on to see this same figure a few more times throughout my duration of university, sticking its head in the door once while I was cuddling on the couch with my now ex, occasionally rummaging through my ex's and her roommates' backpacks, and kneeling beside my bed with its hands resting on the mattress like it was praying for me. The most sinister entity I have ever encountered. As a clairvoyant, I have experienced numerous unique and fascinating interactions with spirits and entities. Most have been good, some bad, but I have only ever dealt with a few evil ones. This is a fairly long read detailing my encounters with the witch who tormented me for 5 years in the most horrendous ways. I do not know how she found me or why she hated me, but I will tell you the first time I ever saw her. I was dreaming I had entered into a small country pub, the ceilings were low, and it had that fusty smell of beer and thyme. Outside the windows was a quiet rural lane surrounded by hedgerows and what looked like farmers' fields beyond that. It was a lovely warm day, but the scene was eerily quiet. There were 2 sections to the pub, one side, which was devoid of anyone and what looked like a working bar, and the other side was closed off to the public and looked like it was being used to store old furniture. I found myself wandering around the furniture, admiring a beautiful antique writing bureau, when I suddenly felt disoriented. My legs started to give way as my head began to spin out of nowhere. My center of gravity was thrown out of whack, and I stumbled onto the floor, and a fear I could not explain started to overcome me. I knew something was wrong and had the feeling of being circled by a predator, one I could not see. In a state of panic, I shuffled backward on the floor until my back made contact with a solid object, an old dusty chest of drawers. I attempted to calm my breathing, unable to understand why I felt so much danger. Then I heard a noise above me, a disturbing, croaky, death rattle-like sound. I was terrified, but I found myself slowly raising my head to see what was there. I couldn't help it, I shouldn't have looked, but that macabre sound drew my attention like a moth to a flame. Slowly leering over the top of the drawers directly above me, a face came into view, looming down over me. It was a woman strikingly beautiful, if not cold-looking, with pale blonde curls pinned on top of her head, icy blue eyes, and young, no more than 30, but her mouth was what was the most terrifying. It was stretched open into a gaping black hole with torn, cracked flesh stretching even further, making her face a disfigured, warped, horrifying mess. The rattling was coming from within that cavernous abyss. I have never felt a fear like it, the sort that strips your brain of any normal function and sends your gut plummeting. I could barely scream, I was that scared. It was more like a high-pitched hysterical whimper, which barely left my mouth as her face came closer. Then I woke up sweating and still trying to scream. As disturbing as the dream was, I thought it was just that, a nightmare, although I have never been able to get her face out of my head all these years later. Roughly 6 weeks later, I had another nightmare in which I was involved in a vicious assault on the street outside my home. In this dream, the police came, and as I was being pinned to the ground and arrested with the assailants, I noticed a figure walking around the periphery of the circle of police and people. As my face was being pushed into the ground, it was hard to see who it was, but they were getting closer and closer to the tangle of bodies on the floor. As the police pulled me up, I saw it was a crooked old woman, bedraggled and dirty, hair hanging in her face. It was full of debris and dirt, and she was in an old-fashioned white nightdress. My stomach lurched, and although she looked different, I knew it was the same woman I had encountered in my nightmare weeks before. As if she sensed my realization, she rapidly lurched forward between the police holding me in place and sank her teeth into my arm and disappeared, leaving my arm an immediate septic mess crawling with maggots and decaying. The pain was what woke me up. I bolted upright, expecting to see teeth marks on my forearm as it throbbed, and although there were none, the area was red as if I had been pinched. I suspected then that these were not ordinary dreams and that she was a separate entity, not some reoccurring imaginary figure. I didn't know yet that she was a witch, but the more she encroached into my dreams and life, the more I psychically saw snippets of hers. She had a knack for showing herself two different ways, one as the young beautiful woman, although never again with that hideous deformed mouth, and the other as a stereotypical hag. Every few weeks I would encounter her in my dreams, which was where I figured out she was a dreamwalker, as I call this gift, not sure if it's the correct term. A spirit or entity that can manipulate someone's dreams. In another dream, she was standing by my bed, her hand around my throat, slowly squeezing until I couldn't breathe until I woke up violently gasping for breath. I had that same experience several times. Another time on my day off work, I woke up and, feeling lazy, decided to lounge in bed a little longer in and out of sleep until I became acutely aware of someone very close to me staring at the back of my head. I knew it was her, and everything inside me screamed, "Do not turn around and look at her," so I stayed still, face pushed into my pillow, and then something peculiar happened. As if I was stood in the corner of my bedroom, I could see everything. Me lying in bed covered up and face down and hovering about 2 foot above my body. Parallel to me there was a opaque brown swirling humanoid mass. Other times I would dream she was hovering above me, and in a half-sleeping/awake state, too terrified to move, she would reach inside my chest, and I could feel an odd pressure around my heart, squeezing, causing it to beat out of rhythm. All I could do was lie there and pray that I didn't have a heart attack, as the thumping of my heart inside my chest would speed up rapidly and then slow down so there were seconds between each beat. I tried putting a protection boundary around my home, but it never seemed to keep her out. In the end, my spirit guides shut me down entirely to protect me from her. I guess being psychically open was what kept the link going between us. The complete radio silence I had for 3 years was eerie to say the least, and not something I was used to, as having random spirits popping in and out had been my way of life since I was 11 years old. It did the job. I didn't see her again for 3 years. When I became pregnant with my daughter, I unintentionally started to open up again. I only had 2 more experiences with her after this, although I was disheartened to know she was still linked to me. The night she showed herself again, she entered my dream as usual. I was lying in bed, and in this dream I woke, and my quilt was hovering a few feet in the air above me. Through the gap in the dark between myself and the floating quilt, I could see someone shuffling around the edge of my bed back and forth. The familiar feeling of fear that came with her held me in place, scared shitless of what she was going to do next. To my absolute horror, the figure climbed underneath the hovering quilt at the foot of the bed and slowly worked its way up over my body until she was on top of me and her face was in front of mine. Her hair trailed across my skin, and she smelled of damp earth. Then she spoke. "You thought I was gone." She hissed at me, and all I could do was try and scream myself awake. Suddenly the quilt dropped back onto the bed, and I bolted upright, finally awake. My quilt, which I usually cocoon myself inside, was stuffed down on the floor between my bed frame and the wall with a window that looked out onto the street. I refused to sleep at my home the next night, telling my friend I couldn't believe she was back after all this time had passed. My last encounter I ever had with her was odd to say the least, as it seemed as if she couldn't get as close to me as usual. Again in my dream I awoke, and she had me by my throat, both of us dangling in the air over my bed. Here she was, her younger self, porcelain skin, fair hair and all, just staring into my soul as I struggled to breathe. I can't explain the look she had on her face. It wasn't anger, disgust. I don't know, just a cold indifference to me with maybe a hint of defeat. It felt different, and although I woke up struggling to breathe and with a sore neck, I don't think she had actually been inside the room with me. That was the last I ever saw of her, and hopefully I will. I questioned myself early on whether it was a form of sleep paralysis, but I know that it wasn't. I have never suffered with it before or since, and that explanation just didn't seem to fit. I suspect she was trying to stop my heart or physically scare me to death, but why? As I said, I saw glimpses of her life. I know she was a healer woman in a small community, but over time she seemed to get treated with more suspicion and hatred and shunned out of the area until she was living on the very periphery of society. Perhaps she was once respected, but over time, people began to fear her. I have no doubt she was immensely gifted in life, but unfortunately she has passed over with the same gifts, fully understanding how to manipulate energy. Hands down, one of the few spirits that straight up terrified me. Encounter with something. This happened when I was living out in South Korea back in the early 2000s. It was Chuseok or Seollnal, I forget which, so I had time off work, and my friends/family were all off doing their own thing, so I ended up deciding to go for a short hike up a mountain. I'd been told that it was a fairly short hike, and it tends to always be deserted on Chuseok, so I figured nobody would be around to see me if I had to give up halfway. So I set out on the mountain path, lots of trees, pretty nice. It was one of those commonly hiked trails, so there were a few wooden pavilions around, mostly empty. I am hardly in good shape, so around halfway up, I decide to stop at one to catch my breath. This pavilion was set just off a dirt path, quite narrow, and the only way to get up there apart from that would be to scramble up/down a quite steep dirt ledge. Which was why I was quite surprised to suddenly see an old man sitting at the side of the pavilion when I was like 90% certain he hadn't been there before. I was weirded out, but when I got over the initial fright, I was mostly just embarrassed that I must have been so out of breath I didn't notice this guy sitting there. It takes me a minute or so of sitting there and drinking my water to realize something else strange. The guy is completely motionless. It was fairly windy up on the mountain that day, but I swear even his hair isn't blowing. He's sitting with his side to me, overlooking the mountain, and he is just completely still. It's as if his eyes are frozen in place. I went, "Excuse me?" to check if he was alright, and he turned and gave me this huge, shit-eating grin. A lot of people living in Korea assume my first language is English because I'm white, but my first language is actually very obscure, less than 100k speakers worldwide obscure, not going to name it because it's unusual enough to somewhat dox me. You wouldn't be able to tell from my accent, I mostly just have a regular North American accent. So you can imagine my surprise when the guy answers me in that language and tells me that he is just enjoying the lovely day. I reply that I'm surprised he speaks that way, and he just winks at me, and I suddenly feel an absolutely insane amount of anxiety. I could literally feel my heart pumping in my chest, it was beating so fast. I just went home after that and booked it down the mountain as fast as possible. Never told anyone about it until today. Still wonder if I encountered something up there or if I just had some kind of mental episode. My father's encounter with a 10-foot tall man. My father grew up in Costa Rica. He grew up in the country where it's mostly farms and agriculture. Houses are very far apart except for a few villages. This event would have taken place sometime in the mid to late 80s, and as has been explained to me by both my parents, around this time there weren't any phone lines, just streetlights, and that's about it. My father started working around the age of 9. He would go down to villages or centers in order to sell or deliver vegetables as my grandparents grew vegetables like lettuce, tomatoes, and more. He would very often stay out late, as he would be required to deliver vegetables to several restaurants. One night as he was heading back, a herd of goats was obstructing the road. To put it into perspective, he uses a little carriage, like the ones ice cream vendors tend to use in Hispanic countries, so he couldn't just scoot by, as his carriage was being blocked as well. Then from behind him, he heard a voice state, "Cuánto para una lechuga, muchacho?" which translates to "how much for a lettuce, young man?" When my father turned around, he said he saw a 10-foot tall man who looked very skinny, bordering on malnourished with pale skin. He couldn't completely see his face, however, he stated that from what little he could see, his face was very sunken. The man was wearing overalls with a flannel shirt, a bandana on his neck, and a straw hat. I know the description sounds very stereotypical, however, again, this does take place in the deep county, like an hour away from any city or town. According to my father, the straw hat cast a shadow, thus, he couldn't see the man's eyes, however, he could see his sunken cheeks and crooked teeth when he talked. My father was weirded out, but due to how young he was, in his early teens, around 10 to 13, he just assumed it was a very tall man, instead of something paranormal or something he should be afraid of, thus my father said the price, The man paid, and my father handed him a piece of lettuce, which according to him, the man was able to hold with one hand comfortably. As the man walked away with the lettuce, according to my father, he whistled, and the goats followed him. My father then made his way home. If he told my grandma, or anything like that, I'm not sure, he didn't specify. As I said before, this took place decades ago, and the area it took place in was very isolated with no houses nearby. To explain the area better, a lot of oil palm trees are grown there, thus, there are areas where you won't see a house for a few miles, and all you'll see are just huge banks of oil palm trees. As for how he knew he was 10 feet, it was just a guess. However, he stated he was as tall as the ceiling of the house we were in when he told the story, and the ceiling was pretty high, at least 10 feet is my guess. I heard this story a few months ago, so I decided to share it here since it intrigued me a lot. If you have any questions, please don't be shy to ask. I have plenty of stories like these due to my family all growing up in the deep country, and plenty of relatives stating they've seen weird things. How true are they? I'm not sure, however, I've been told them as if they were fact. Humanoid growling in the backyard after other strange events. A little backstory. My father lived with us for a while, 6 months prior to passing away. Long story short, my father was a drug addict who became violent and had to be forced from our home. This led to us not speaking to him for the last few months of his life. He didn't pass away peacefully. Since his death, my family has experienced 3 more losses. Our home has become a place of constant sadness and negative energy. The last few months, we have been experiencing some strange happenings. My father installed our ceiling fan, and it has always turned itself on sporadically. After his passing, it started happening at least once a day, turning on full blast, in conjunction with the TV turning on. My father put a small screw in the back of the remote to keep the battery cover on. I would set the remote down on the table, turn my back, and then the TV and fan would turn on. Sometimes, it would take me turning the TV off several times for it to stay off. This stopped happening after my mom canceled cable and returned the remote to the provider. The ceiling fan went back to only turning on sometimes. I know this could easily be explained as an electrical/wiring issue. We have my father's ashes on top of our china cabinet, and we had some photos of him around it. The photos kept falling off with no explanation. My mom took the photos down after a framed picture of her and him fell and shattered, ruining the photo. He found the photo in storage shortly before he was removed from our home. When my partner and I are home alone, we've both heard cabinet doors slamming. The front and back doors slamming. What sounds like a drawer opening and being rummaged through, then slammed shut. Chairs are being pushed in and out. But when investigated, no one is there. The cats and dog will be asleep in another room, or were in our sight. Several times when I've showered, while home alone, I will hear voices in the house. I keep seeing shadows out of the corner of my eye, and the other day, I briefly saw a brown outline of a person in my kitchen. This did not happen prior to my father's passing. Yesterday was my aunt's funeral. She passed young and suddenly. We have all taken it kind of hard. Last night, my partner and I were sitting on the back porch for a few hours, just talking. As I was mid-sentence, we suddenly heard footsteps and a loud growling sound that was getting closer. We both immediately got up and ran inside. Felt this primordial sense that I was in danger. It made my heart beat fast and my hair stand up on the back of my neck. Didn't see anything after looking around 10 minutes later. The growl sounded like it came from a human. The yard is fenced in, and the gate on the side of the yard the noise came from was locked. And the other gate was in view of us. If someone had jumped the fence, we would have heard it. We were outside for 2 hours, and my dog had been out with us. If a person had been there, she would have run up to them. If it had been an animal, she would have been trying to run at it or alert us to it. She's a hunting breed and has done so before. We talked to my mom, and she has had a similar experience in the yard. We can't figure out what it could be. Can't think of a plausible explanation. German Shepherd with a humanoid body. I never shared this event on the internet, only with friends or family members. I am sorry if I misspelled a few words, English is not my first language. Here goes. When I was around 6 or 7 years old, before we moved into the countryside, I went through many weird events that I cannot explain or that I barely remember. One of these weird moments stuck with me, and I still remember it clearly to this day. I am now 29. I had a bunk bed, and I was always sleeping on top. I had a small square TV in my room, and every night I was watching it before falling asleep. One of those nights, I was looking at the TV, but something weird happened. My TV was in the right corner of my room, and my door was in the left corner of my room. I then saw a humanoid shape in the left corner of my eyes. I thought it was my parents checking on me. I then looked at what it was. My door was halfway open, then I saw it. It was a German Shepherd, standing at human height and possessing a humanoid body. It was looking at me without moving. When I started staring back at it, I felt weaker and weaker, and the room started spinning around me. Everything then went to black. I think I might have fallen asleep. But I will always remember the dream I had that night. I found myself in my sister's room. I then saw my dad enter the room. I don't remember what he told me, but when he got close to me, he started tickling me nonstop. I was laughing at first, but soon after, I asked him to stop. But then, something happened. It was not my dad that was tickling me anymore, but the humanoid German Shepherd. It would tickle me nonstop at a point where it started to hurt. It then switched back to my dad still tickling me and then to IT again. I would ask it to stop and to tell it, it's hurt. I then woke up in my bed in the morning. I have never seen this entity ever again as far as I know. But I learned some fascinating info. My parents used to have 2 German Shepherds, but one of them died before I was born and the other when I was really young, I think. I'm not sure how this strange entity is related to them. It could have been a dream from the beginning or something else entirely. I guess I will never know. My experience with the unexplained in my childhood home. I grew up in central Indiana in the 9-county region. My parents had kids before they were ready, and it resulted in us not having much money growing up. My parents struggled to make ends meet, and it resulted in my grandparents raising me for large portions of the day so that my parents could work. My grandparents' home had a storied past. It was built in the mid-1800s, prior to the onset of the Civil War. Supposedly, the first owner was a stop on the Underground Railroad, and this resulted in the house having false walls that opened up to small enclosed areas. It was bizarre, and my friends thought it was the coolest thing to have these tiny passages throughout the house. My father actually grew up in the place, too. It was a 2-story single-family dwelling with an attic and a basement. Growing up, my father and grandfather would crack jokes about Mr. Cooper. I didn't know anyone by that name, and when asked, my father would always say that the guy was just the previous owner of the home. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just knew that my father wasn't overly fond of the second floor of the home and wouldn't take anything upstairs to the second floor unless the sun was out. Again, I was a child and thought nothing of this, as I only stayed on the first floor anyway. My grandparents died when I was a child and left the home to my father because of his financial issues at that time. There were 3 bedrooms at the top of the stairs with a staircase leading down to the first level. My brother and I were forced to share one of these rooms because the middle bedroom had been converted into a junk room over time by my grandparents. They were born prior to the onset of the Great Depression and rationing in World War II. As a result, they kept everything and just stored it in this one room. The door was hard to open because of the amount of junk in there, and it was stacked so densely that there wasn't really anywhere to walk. If you've ever seen an episode of Hoarders, that one room looked like that, just without the dead animals and decaying food. My sister had the 3rd bedroom to herself, which we referred to as the blue room because the walls were painted blue. My grandmother seemed to dread that particular room, but I thought nothing of it at the time. My bedroom and the blue room were the locations of the only 2 false walls I knew about. Both of the closets had a wall that required a minimal amount of force to expose a smaller closet on the other side. Because my grandmother died when I was a child, I never thought to ask why she hated that room. I know why she hated it now. It only took a year to find out. On Christmas Eve in 2001, I was sleeping in the blue room with my brother and sister. The house predated central heating and cooling. Instead, the house had a fireplace that heated the entire house through a network of pipes that fed the smoke through a couple of chimneys. We also depended on window-mounted air conditioners to cool the house in each room. These were the same units my grandparents bought with analog dials to set temperature that made a click sound every time you turned it. As such, we tended to congregate in whichever room was cooler or hotter to sleep in. On that particular night, it was the blue room. On that night, I was woken up by the bedroom door slipping open and opening slightly. We had pets, so my assumption was that one of the animals wanted to warm up too. As I attempted to go to sleep, I heard the air conditioner come on and the clicking of the temperature dials. I sat up to look over at the machine and saw nothing there, just the dials turning back and forth. I yelled for my sister to get up, and the dials suddenly stopped turning. At that moment, the door just shut the rest of the way on its own. My brother was still sound asleep, but my sister and I sat there terrified. We had to yell for our parents to turn on the stairway light, which was on the other side of that door, before either of us would leave. Needless to say, I never slept in that room again. Flash forward a couple of years to somewhere in 2003 or 2004. My dad works his tail off to get a high-paying position that results in us doing some renovations to the house, including my bedroom. In that time, the only unusual activity I had ever heard was footsteps upstairs once in a while during the night and periods when I felt like I was being watched or I wasn't alone, despite knowing that no one else was there. Because of the renovations, the curtain rods had not yet been installed on my bedroom windows. The only bedroom windows that I had faced a county road that ran just in front of the house, which resulted in any car going by having its headlights flood my bedroom with light. It was late that night, and I woke up to a scratching sound coming from the wall behind my bed. The sound was so loud that my brother woke up too. This wasn't especially odd as we had some vermin get into the walls during the renovations and were still in the process of getting them out. However, it didn't stop at scratching. What was scratching turned into what sounded like finger tapping on the wall, and then it was full-blown knocking. To this day, I believe those sounds came from that hidden room. My brother and I shot up out of bed as soon as we heard that knocking and were grabbing our stuff to leave. At that moment, I immediately got that feeling that we weren't alone again. A passing car suddenly filled the room with light, and because of the physics of light coming from a passing car, it basically provided light to the room in stages and then faded out. As the light began to fade, my brother and I saw a dark humanoid figure standing by the window. It didn't have any features at all, I just remember it being a figure, and it was gone once all of the light was gone from the room. My brother and I then dashed out of that room screaming. From that point on, we refused to sleep up there at all and slept downstairs in the living room. Quite frankly, I didn't want to go up there for anything anymore. Flash forward again to 2010. I don't go up there for anything beyond clothes and, like my father, will only go so long as the sun is out. The unexplained footsteps still happen once in a while, but nothing prepared me for what was going to happen on one particular night. I had already been a couple of years into college at this point and went to an out-of-state university just to get away from the place, so I was only there for several weeks out of the entire year. My brother was going through some mental health stuff at that time and destroyed the door at the bottom of the staircase leading upstairs by tearing it off of the hinges. My father just left it in the stairwell to fix it later but never got around to the later. I was sleeping on the couch in the downstairs living room, where I had been sleeping since that incident in 2004. My brother and sister were out with friends, and my parents had gone out on a date night, leaving me alone with the animals. I woke up to my cats hissing at what I assumed was one another, but on closer inspection, it appeared to be the dining room where the doorway to the staircase was at. Suddenly, I heard a series of footsteps in the junk room directly above the living room, where I was. I was caught off guard because, again, there wasn't anywhere to walk in that room. I then heard the creaking of the door leading to that junk room, which again made no sense. The door opens heading into the room, and there was so much crap in there that my father couldn't bear to part with it after the death of his parents that you couldn't open it easily. I was already getting up to head out into the dining room because the front door to the house was there. I had no intention of staying in that place by myself with Mr. Cooper. Suddenly, those footsteps sounded like they were jogging down the stairs to come into the dining room with me. As they got louder, I realized they were getting closer to the ground level, and I made a beeline for the front door. Just as I was leaving, I heard the sound of a crash as the broken door flew across the room into a curio cabinet that smashed one of its glass walls. The footsteps were so loud I could hear them darting back up the stairs. I drove away from the area to a department store a few miles away and told my parents to meet me there. I refused to ever be in that home alone. Thankfully, once I got back to college again, my parents informed me that my father had a new job across the country, and I wouldn't have to go back. I don't know what Mr. Cooper is, but the house was ultimately torn down. We couldn't sell it because nobody wanted it. The person who ultimately bought it wanted it exclusively for the land and not the structures on it. It was to their benefit. I couldn't imagine putting anyone else through what I saw, and I don't know that my parents would have been forthright about it out of fear it would scare buyers away. In any case, I'd say that Mr. Cooper got what he wanted because we all left, but he's homeless now. Humanoid figure appearing then disappearing in my childhood home. This had to be when I was 4 or so, before I started preschool. My brother was at school, and it was pretty early in the day, because I was sitting cross-legged on my mom's bed watching Sesame Street while she put away laundry. She was upset about something and began to ramble on about it, while I found myself more focused on the TV than on her words. She had to walk through the bathroom door and then through a second one into the walk-in closet to put the clothes away. As she was walking out with another armful of clothes, I turned my head and watched her go. As soon as she was out of sight, a white, featureless figure shaped like a full-grown man peered around the doorway from where she had just passed by. It looked left and right, kind of like someone would do if they were checking to see if anyone was coming, and then ducked back into the bathroom and disappeared. I didn't really know about aliens or ghosts yet, and I wasn't afraid at all. I just remember thinking, huh. I waited for Mom to come back out to see how she would react. She walked out immediately after, still ranting, and didn't seem to have seen it, so I just went back to watching my show. I never forgot it, though, because it was so odd and right in the middle of the day. I saw something crazy as a kid, one of many things. I had a stressful and traumatic childhood. Drug-addicted older brothers, dramatic bratty older sisters. Boo-hoo, who cares? But, honestly, the other traumatic stuff? It's pretty good nightmare fuel, and as an adult, I always appreciated the crazy aspects of it. Whatever it was. Hallucinations, overactive imagination, or whatever it could have been. Long distanced by time from the primal fear and rage I felt in those situations. There's a novelty to it. Makes me feel special. One of the experiences I had that was particularly intense was towards the end of these encounters. They did stop happening to me eventually, when I was in my early teens. The second time I saw a yellow-eyed thing. I was playing hide and seek with my brother. There were 7 of us, our parents still together. 10 years separate me from my oldest sibling, 7 from my youngest. We had a hectic household as a result, with screaming matches, being beat up by our older siblings, drug addictions, and drama abounding. I was just trying to not be like my annoying, loud, angry, and dramatic older siblings, honestly. Avoid them and just play video games or with my cousin and brother. So there we were, playing hide and seek. All the lights were off, and I was sitting in the living room with my brother. We decided to up the ante, as we were the only ones at home. I forget why, the other stuff kind of blocks the little details out. It was dark out, that I remember clearly. I told him to go outside, and I'll find him in our neighborhood somewhere. I started counting, I started flicking off and on my flashlight along with the count. Like I was the girl in Freddy Krueger. 1, 2, scary cadence. I turned the flashlight towards the hallway wall. It had wood panels with thick knots in them. And one of the knots started to swirl and unravel at the center. And I froze. This thing felt like it was a bubble that made its own rules of reality around it. Out emerged yellow eyes first. Then an elongated face with saurian nostrils and mouth. Then a dilapidated humanoid form behind it. Hunched and scrawny like a Holocaust survivor. It started to move towards me, though I didn't really see it move. Like arms and legs, none of that was registering, just the black pit in the center of its yellow eyes getting closer. Breathlessly, I stood stunned. But this wasn't my first rodeo. And I broke free and ran down the street screaming bloody murder, "Come out, you witch. I'm not playing anymore, some weird shit just happened." That wasn't one for one what I said, but it's close enough. The rest of the night was a blur. My parents got home from a movie or whatever, my older brothers got back from doing drugs or whatever they like to do, and I explained it to them to get the same old overactive imagination. We're definitely not paying for a therapist type stuff. All my childhood I went from shooting my brothers with vacuum cleaner parts as if they were rifles in World War II to worrying about what I would see the next night. Would I wake up at 3 a.m. on the dot? Would I sleep through a dreamless night like I hoped? Anxiety inducing. Over the years, people would claim anxiety was crippling, but I was born in anxiety, molded by it. They were simply adopted by it. It was like a cold river that I long acclimated to. The horns. Disclaimer, this story was told to me by a friend's wife. I have also been in that location, and there is really a strange vibe to it. Over 25 years ago, I was just a little girl, around 9 years old. I used to live in a big town with my mom. I remember I was a really active kid. My grandfather used to live on a farm near the city, and I really liked my grandpa, so I would visit constantly. My grandma had just passed away earlier that year, so my grandpa asked me and my mother to stay at his house for a month on mom's vacation, just so he wouldn't be so alone. My mom agreed and took her vacation right when I had my school vacation. We went to his house the next morning. His house was very far away, and his property was also very large. It was huge. It had a large patch of forest, a small lake, and a small barn where he would have horses. He used to sell and breed horses for a living so he wouldn't have to plant anything and destroy the forest. When I was like 6 years old, he had given me a newborn horse. I called him Sultan, as he was half Arabic bred, mostly white, and had brown spots on him. The house was big, mostly made of wood. It had a workshop in the back, open with a view to the barn. It had over 4 large rooms and a giant kitchen. My mom grew up in that house with her sisters. My mom had 2 sisters, and she used to tell me stories about their adventures in the woods and the lake. She never told me of anything supernatural there. My grandfather, on the other hand, used to tell me all kinds of stories about that forest. Stories about fairies, gnomes, and all kinds of magical creatures who used to live there. Sometimes at night, he would bring all the family outside, and we could see colored lights coming from the forest. My mom would then say it was the light beetles. In the US, we refer to them as click beetles. In fact, there were large beetles that used to appear at night sometimes. However, some of the lights were pink, and I had never seen a pink one. I really enjoyed the farm and all the things we would do. Unfortunately, that particular day we arrived there, my grandpa was sad, but he smiled a bit when we arrived. Mom and Grandpa started talking. Meanwhile, I went to the barn on my own to see Sultan. As I got close to it, I felt something was wrong, as the horses were restless and very agitated. I got closer and slowly opened the door to the barn. I quickly saw a small black shadow going out through one of the windows of the barn. The horses were still scared but were calming down now. I looked outside but saw nothing, even though the sun was still up. I played with Sultan a bit and went back inside because it was almost night. I and my mom used to sleep in the same room when we were there, and that night we did just that. I used to lie on a mattress on the floor next to a bed where my mom would sleep. This way, I could see under her bed. At night, I woke up, my mom was sleeping. I started looking around the bedroom. That's when I looked under the bed. Under her bed, illuminated by the dim light from the moon that went through the window, there was this thing. It was like a girl, lying under her bed. She was very pale, so pale in fact that she was plain out gray. She had these big yellow glowing eyes and had a black mouth opened in my direction. I screamed, and the thing disappeared right in front of my eyes. My mom woke up and started trying to calm me down as I was sobbing uncontrollably. My grandfather came through the door later. He then tells me and my mom that it was the horns and that he is doing stuff like that since grandmother died. My mom starts screaming at him, saying that I was having that episode because of all the stories he tells about the farm. I remember I spent almost the whole night crying in despair. In the morning, my mom took me home. My mom agreed to go back to my grandpa's house a few days later. I didn't want to go, so my mom dropped me at one of my aunt's houses. For the next 10 years, I didn't step into his house anymore, even though I almost forgot the whole incident when I was a teenager. I had a lot of friends and things to do. My grandfather used to go to our home to visit, and he would tell me about how Sultan was doing. When I was around 20, my grandpa passed away from a heart attack in his house. It took over 3 days for people to find him. From that day, my aunts and my mom would spend some days in the house each, tending to the remaining horses, including Sultan. A year later, I was going through heavy depression after a breakup. I was very miserable and had constant suicidal thoughts. I wouldn't tell anyone that, though. I ended up telling my mom I needed some time to recollect myself. My mom was very understanding and suggested I go to my grandpa's old house for a change. I reflected a bit about that, but as I would barely remember what had happened, I ended up agreeing to it. I went to my grandpa's old house then. As soon as I arrived there, it was about 1 p.m. I got some stuff out of my car and got inside the house. I had a lot of things since I would be there for an undetermined amount of time. As soon as I was done, I went to the barn. Only a few horses remained. Sultan was there too. I filled their water and went back to the house. I spent the next week tidying up the place, fixing things here and there. I even managed to cut my own wood for fire. The chores were hard, but I was getting used to them. Then things started to get a bit weird. It all started with things changing places. Things I could swear I left in some places would end up in others. The trash can outside would shake at night, and the horses would make a lot of noise some nights. One particular night, I heard a weird buzz coming from outside. I looked out the front window and saw the lights in the tree line. I stood there, observing them. Suddenly I saw movement in the low grass. The light of the moon helped illuminate the grass. Then I saw it. Small humanoid forms, brown and walking erratically. They were about 7 or 8 inches tall. At first I thought they were little monkeys, only when 2 of them went up the trash can could I have a better look at them. They were actually wearing tiny clothes made of some kind of fur. I watched in shock as they threw some of the trash outside the can, and some more of them came to get it. I got freaked out the rest of the night, locked inside my room. By morning I got out of my room. I left some food in a pan in the kitchen, it wasn't there anymore. I started thinking about it more. My grandfather used to say that there were gnomes around the property. Were these things gnomes? I remembered my grandpa saying that they liked bread and milk with sugar in a bowl. So that evening, right before night, I left a bowl with just that, right near the window. And sure enough, that night, the tiny people came. They started grabbing the contents of the plate and carried it away. I tried to get my camera, an old film camera I had. I took some pictures of them without the flash. When the plate was empty, All of them went back running to the colored lights at the tree line. From that day, my life changed a lot. I started to leave a plate of bread and milk every day outside, and they stopped going through the trash can. On the wooden table I used to leave the plate, gifts started to appear. Getting flowers from the table in the morning was a common occurrence now. My walks in the farm's forest were now full of tiny little shadows following me on the trees. Even sultans started to calm down around them. At the property lake, when I was approaching it, I could hear singing from feminine voices all around. When I got closer, they would stop, but the lake would look more inviting than ever. The other horses were fine too, always happily running around the property. What was to be a month quickly became 6 months. I had a small farm now, where I would grow vegetables for myself and either sell or give the rest to the gnomes. Used to spend my nights on the balcony, just appreciating the lights at the tree line. I was happier than ever. One day, I woke up early and took a shower. The house had a water heating system, so the bathroom was steamy. When I got to the mirror, I could see written on the steam, "He comes. Keep you." That took me by surprise, and I freaked out a bit. I tried to calm down. The phone then rings. It's my mom. She doesn't call very often now, so I was surprised. She asked me if I was okay and asked a weird question, if I had seen something weird lately. I didn't tell my mom about the things of the forest. I told her everything was okay. She accepted it and said that if anything happened, I could call her. After the call, I finally went outside to check on the plate. This time, the plate was filled, completely untouched. At its side, however, a small bag of tissue. I got the plate and the bag and took them inside, and as I went in, I opened the bag. A weird green stone, looking roughly like it was picked from a mineral vein, and a green and purple crystal were bound together by wood fiber, making a loose necklace. I started admiring the crystals. At this point I respected the gnomes a lot to refuse one of their gifts, so I started wearing the necklace. My day went just as usual. I chopped some wood and tended to the horses. At dusk I went inside to prepare for the lights. I made my bed, but when I got to the door, I saw a tiny little shadow running in my room's direction. I got weirded out and decided to follow it. As soon as I got into one of the rooms, I felt like something was off. I looked out the room's window, and the tree line was dark. Started to feel uneasy. Suddenly, illuminated by the moon, I see a big black figure. It was like some kind of dog. It had the front paws smaller than the back ones, a large canine head, 2 long ears that would go all the way to the floor, 2 massive horns on its head, and yellow glowing eyes. I stood there in shock for a moment, as the thing kept crawling around. I heard a little voice in my head. "Hide." I got out of the front of the window just when the thing was about to look at me. I was shaking and breathing heavily. "Hide," the voice said again. I ran in the direction of my room, opened my closet, and locked myself in. As it was an old closet, there were some holes through the wood. The house was illuminated by the moon. I held my breath as I saw my room's door opening slowly. A pale girl, wearing a white dress, enters the room. I can hear a loud hum in the air, as if that sound accompanied her. She starts walking around the room, twitching and making noises. At one point I can see her face. Big yellow eyes and a black, unnaturally open mouth. It twitched its way around the room. It finally stopped in front of the closet. It stayed there for some time. I then see a small shadow passing behind it and going through the door. The thing turned around immediately and threw itself in the direction of the shadow. It fell on the ground and twitched rapidly, running on all fours into the darkness. I cried silently at that point. Time passed, and I started to hear the horses scared by something. All I could do was wait until the noises stopped. When the noises stopped, I heard some movement behind me in the closet. I slowly looked back. At the corner, the white girl is in a fetal position, looking at the corner. I felt my muscles shaking as I looked at her. She starts making that hum noise again. I cover my mouth so I don't scream. The head of the girl twitches backward. She looks at me with the yellow glowing eyes. I screamed. The girl then vanishes. I barge out of the closet and run to the bathroom. As I run, I hear something large sliding in the living room. I got to the bathroom and closed the door. I started to pray. It was an eternity for me, but things calmed down, and morning came. I got out of the bathroom, and the first thing I did was call my mother. I could barely speak. My mom calmed me down and said she was going to see me. I then looked around to see the damages. Stains of a black substance were all around the living room floor. The room smelled like rotten eggs. All the furniture was thrown all around the house. The front door was destroyed. The door from the barn was messed up as well. Black stains would fill the grass in front of the house as well. A red pool of blood was near the barn, and there were no noises coming from there. My mom then came by. She stopped the car and got to me. I hugged her and started to cry while I explained everything to her. She listened to everything quietly. She then made me get into her car, and we drove off after closing the house. She then told me that her mother, my grandmother, used to make weird stuff around the house. She would do all those rituals with minerals and potions. She explained to me that one day, she actually attracted the attention of an entity, and it became known to them as the horns. The thing was very hostile, but her mother would keep it away from the family. She was very young when all of that happened, and she was unsure if it had happened or not. But she remembers that my grandmother would spread these weird green crystals around whenever July came by. I showed her the crystal. Something was wrong, the rocks were brittle now. She looked at them. That's how they looked in August. I got them yesterday, I said. She kept looking at it. She explained to me that they were fluorite and a somewhat rare crystal called aventurine. She then asked me how I got them, and then I told her about the gnomes. She listened quietly. She then laughs as I finish telling her, looks at me, and says, with tears in her eyes, "So, they were real." I went back home. All the horses died that day. The farm remained closed for a few years, until it reopened recently. Today I graduated college and have a husband. I was seriously thinking of giving the place another chance.